Have you ever wanted to design and code your website from scratch? In just 3 hours and 30 minutes, we will learn how to create a complete Figma auto layout website and transform it into a fully functional HTML CSS website. You can also get access to the source code and the Figma file in this video. This full course is broken down into 16 steps, and all the timestamps are added in the description. From step 1 to 9, we will design the website in Figma, and from step 10 to 16, we will code it. I have combined 16 videos in one single video, so you can have your ultimate guide on how to design a website in Figma and code it in HTML CSS. Step 1. So if I toggle back the UI, the first thing we need to do is basically copy this navigation bar and the colors to another page. So let's just go ahead and do that. I would first click on the navigation, Command and C to copy, visit another page, rename this to components, and then I would paste that here. In order for me to create a separation between these two, I can create another page and add 3 dashes, and if I press return on my keyboard, it creates a divider between them. So I can click and drag this. A divider is basically created between them. Also, what I need to do for my navigation is bringing the logo and also creating some color styles, because if I click outside here, you see we don't have any color styles to choose from. So I'll go back to the starter page, click on the Notion logo, copy this, go to the components page, paste that here as well, and then finally I will go to the starter page, copy the colors and go back to the components page and then paste them here as well. Step 2. So the first thing we need to do is basically recreate colors out of these color palette that we have. What you can do is basically rename them one by one and create color styles, which means you can click on this color, and then if you go ahead and visit the fill section, you can highlight over that 4 dots, select that, click plus, and then here we have the style. And then in this example, we are going to use this for our primary color. So what I can do is rename this to primary, and usually I would rename this based on the lightness, which means if I click on the fill, here we have a lightness of 5. So I would rename this after the /5. And then once I'm done, I would create. And as soon as I click create, here you see on the right hand side, we have primary. And then if I click, you see we have the lightness of 5 added. The reason Figma created a folder is because we added the /. So if I have to repeat this for every single one of them, clicking, going to the fill section, clicking plus, and renaming it that way, it might be time consuming. So you can use a plugin to actually generate all of that. And then once you generate the styles, you can actually rename them one by one. This way you can save a couple of clicks by going and applying styles one at a time. So if I click outside and basically delete this, once I delete everything, all I have to do is basically click on my colors, open my layer panel, and then as you can see, they have generic names. So what I can do is I can rename them one by one from the layer panel and then use the plugin to generate the colors. So the way I would categorize them, I would basically select both of these and categorize them as primary. So I would hold Command and R to rename both of them as bulk, and then just type primary and give it a /. By doing that, it would rename both of them as bulk. So I would click rename, and then I would click on the first one, double click on that, and then just give it a 5. Click on the other one, double click on that. I would give it 94, because if I click on the fill here, you see that the lightness value is 94. So I would basically rename this primary color to 94 as well. So I would highlight both of these as well, Command and R, rename this to secondary and add a /, and then I would click on the first one, and as you can see, if I click on the fill, it is 53 in terms of the lightness. So what you can do is round this up to 50. So here on the secondary, I would just go with 50. If I select the other one, on the HSL value, it is actually being renamed to 93. So we can round this up to 94. And then we have another color here. I would just rename this to tertiary, and then I would give it a /. And then if I go ahead and select the fill, here we see that the lightness is 43. So I would just basically round this to 40. And then finally, this is a white color. And then if I click on the fill, white is always 100% in terms of lightness, which means I would just double click, just give it a gray color, and then / and just give it 100. So if I take a look at the left hand side, this is how we renamed our colors. And what we have to do is select all of them, Command and /, and then run a command called generate styles. If you don't see this command, you have to run this plugin first. And the way you would do that is you would go to the plugins, you would search for the plugin called Styler, and then here, this is the plugin that I use. You can click on the 3 dots, view detail, and then if you click run, it gives you a couple of options. So what you can do is run the generate style command. As soon as you run this and you save this to your plugins, next time you can just basically use Command and / and search for generate style, and it would automatically appear for you. So you don't need to click multiple times to get to that. So here I would click on generate style, and here we have 7 styles generated. If I click outside, you see all of the styles are generated for us automatically. So that would save us a ton of time. Instead of us clicking on one of them one by one and renaming them and creating a style, we would just rename them all at once using the / naming convention, and then use the generate style to generate them all as a bulk. So what I can do is just double click that and then just write color renamed and then cut that. I can go back to the starter page and then add that next to this one so you can have that for your reference. So this way you have the renamed version for your reference. Step 3. So now if I go back to my components page, I can finally start creating the buttons. And the first thing that I need to do is basically add a text on my canvas. The shortcut is T, and then as you can see, as soon as I click T, text is highlighted for me, so I can zoom in, click anywhere, and then just type in link. I'll click outside, hold Shift and A to create an auto layout, and I would double click on that, rename this to link. Also from the auto layout panel, I would give it 12 pixels of padding on left and right, and as well as 8 pixels of padding on top and bottom. And in terms of the border radius, I would go to the appearance and then just give it 4 pixels. You might not see any difference. The reason is we haven't given it a background color. The way you would give it a background color is we would go to our fill, click on that 4 dots, and now we can select colors from our primary color palette. So we would select the 5, and then if we click on the link here, we would select the 100%, which is white. And now if I zoom in, I have my primary link created. What I need to do is create a component out of this. So I would click on that. I would scroll all the way up. Here you see that we have the create component icon. You can always search for that as well. So you can just hold command and / search for create component. And then once you do that, you see the icon is changed. We have our component created. What we need to do is add a text property. The reason we add a text property, it allows us to edit our text when we select our button, which means if I hold option and drag this button out, we have an instance right now. We can tell that this is an instance because if we take a look at the left hand side, the icons are different. And if we take a look at the right hand side, we see we can't change the text. It would be nice if we select the actual link and have the ability to change the text property right from the panel. So the way we would do that is we would select the link and select the text inside the link, and we would scroll to the typography section and select this tiny icon, and then here you see we have component property created. So we would rename this to label, and then for the value we would just give it a default value for now, and we would create the property. As soon as we create the property, here you see we have our text property created. So right now if I go back to my instance and select it, if I scroll up, you see we have a property called label, which means we can simply select that and start typing, for example, login. And then as soon as we do that, the actual button would change. Previously, we didn't have this option. Because we created a text property, now we can have the ability to edit the value of the button. Also, we need to create another secondary button. Now we would click on our link, and then as you can see here, we have a different icon, which is called add a variant. If we click on that, Figma creates a variant for us. We can give this variant a background color so we can see it clearly. We can go to the fill section, select the variant, and then just add plus to give it a background color so we can see it better. And if we click the variant and then if we scroll up, Figma gave it a default property. So in order for us to switch between different styles, we have to give it a property name. For example, here we can double click on it, give it a property of color, and then for the value we can give the first one a value of black and the second one a value of white. And then all we have to do right now is go to the second button, which has the value of white, and change the background color. So we visit the fill section, we change the background color from 5 to 94, and then the text color from 100% to 5. This way we flip the colors. And now if I go ahead and select my button and scroll up, here you see we have color, which is called black and white. And as soon as I switch between them, we have the ability to switch between our links. If you have only 2 values in your variant, what you can do is use true and false values, which means I can click on my first button, and instead of actually having it as black, I would just rename this to true. And I would go on my other one, which is white, and I would rename this to false. And if I go ahead and click on my instance, right now you see I have a toggle, which means I can actually switch between white and black using a custom toggle that I just created. On top of that, I have the ability to change the value and change it at the same time. Since we changed this to toggle, it doesn't make sense to have the property name as color. For example, if the toggle is on, the link is actually turned into black, which means if I go to the link component, I can double click on the color and then rename this to black. As soon as the toggle is set to true, the black color appears. As soon as it's set to false, it switches back to the white. So I can click on that, and then here we see we have black, so we can switch and turn off the black color, and now we're back at the white color. Step 4. Since we have our button created, all we have to do is basically replicate that and replace the text values using the newly created component. So I'll click and drag this, and I need to basically duplicate this multiple times. I can duplicate this by using the Command D shortcut, but at first I would just select that, Shift and A to create an auto layout, rename this to nav, and then I would set the direction from vertical to horizontal, and then in the fill section I would just basically give it a background color of white, which is gray, 100. As soon as I select that, here we have our navigation created, and then as you can see, our first button has a bit of a contrast between the background color and the navigation. So what I can do is basically click and drag this, but what you notice is our button is actually being stretched, and we don't want that behavior. So what I have to do is basically group the button into two different groups, which means the product, teams, individuals, download and pricing, these would be one group, demo, login, and get Notion for free, there will be another group, and then finally we have the logo. So let's just go ahead and do that. And in order for us to not confuse these two, I can double click and then just rename this to the wireframe. So we know that this is the wireframe and this is the navigation. And then here on the left hand side, we have the navigation, and then we have the instance, which is the link. I can click on that, Shift and A to create another auto layout. And then I can double click, rename this to right. And I also want to make sure that the direction is set to horizontal. Now, if I go ahead and select the auto layout, I want to have this as hug. Also, if I go to my button, I would select that, and instead of fill, I would have this as hug as well. Right now, we managed to fix that issue. So all we need to do is basically select the instance, Command and D, and duplicate that 3 times. And that would be the 3 links that we have on the right hand side. Since we renamed this to the right, now we would select the right side, Command and D to duplicate that, double click, rename this to left. And then as you can see, we have 5 links. So we would select the link, Command and D 2 times. So we have 5 links. And then finally, we would have the Notion logo. So we would select the Notion logo, Command and C to copy that. We would select our navigation, Command and V to paste that, and then we can double click and rename this to logo. And if I zoom outside and if I try to bring the navigation here, as you can see on the left hand side, we have a navigation, which is an auto layout. We have left and right side, again, 2 more auto layouts. And then we have our logo. Since everything is in auto layout, I can use the arrow to move the logo all the way to the left side, and then click on the navigation and drag it all the way. And what I also want is the right navigation to take all the available space and be pushed all the way to the right side. In order to fix that, what you need to do is select the parent navigation, and then instead of having the gap as 10, you would select the drop down and have the gap as auto. As soon as we select the auto, here you see that the right side is actually pushed all the way to the edge. The left side is actually placed in the middle, and then the logo is placed all the way to the left side. And then if we click on the navigation here, you see we managed to create a responsive layout. However, we don't want the middle navigation to be always in the middle. Since we renamed this to left, we want this to be close to the Notion, and we only want the right side to be pushed all the way to the right. So in order to fix that, what we need to do is nest auto layouts one more time, which means we have to select the left and the logo, create another auto layout, and then here double click, rename this to logo plus left, and then give it a gap of 16, for example. By doing that, we have now a navigation, logo and the left side. And if we open logo and the left side, we have the logo and the left, which is another auto layout, and then we have the right side. If we zoom out, we see that we have our right side as well. So what we can do is resize this, and as you can see, only the right side is being resized proportionately. We only want one of the buttons to be primary, so what I can do is double click on one of the links here and then only turn this into black, and we want the text, basically get Notion for free, to be pasted there. So I would just Command and C to copy that, and then select this one, and instead of sign up, I would just paste get Notion for free. And then as you can see, this is how we are managing to update our links. So what I have to do is copy paste these values one by one into the buttons. So we have our navigation created. What you can do is use a plugin to copy the values and select all these buttons and paste them all at once. A plugin that I'm going to use is called ManyPaster. So here I would search for ManyPaster, and then I would open this. What I would do is basically zoom in, select the product teams, and then copy it from the selection. And then here you see that it actually copied everything for me. Now what I have to do is basically select the left side, select all the links within that, press return on my keyboard to select all the individual text, and then click paste data. As soon as I click paste data, here you see all the data is actually being pasted all at once. So I can hide everything on the UI. We managed to create this navigation bar out of our wireframe. And if I go ahead and visit the starter page, here we managed to basically finish the navigation. The next sections that we need to focus on is basically the hero. Step 5. So far we managed to create the navigation. Right now we have to take the hero section and add it just below the navigation. So the first thing that we need to do is for the hero section, we have now with Notion, we do want to turn this into a chip. Chips are basically like buttons, but they're all rounded corner, which means we would exactly have the same button dimension, but everything would be rounded. Also, we would have another color, If we take a look at our colors on the right hand side, here we see we have secondary, which is 94 and 50. This is the secondary color that we want to use. So in order for us to basically create a chip, what we can do is go to the links, hold Option and duplicate. And for our chips, we can rename this the links to chips and then basically highlight both of them. And then if we just drag this a little bit out and scroll down here under appearance, we can just like give it 500 to make sure it is rounded. Also for chips, we don't want it to be 8 pixels because chips are a bit smaller. So we want to reduce the padding from top and bottom from 8 to 4. And since we reduced it, if we take a look at it closer here, we see that it is a bit smaller than the actual button and everything is rounded. So all we have to do is basically select the first chip and go to the fill section. Here on the fill, we have basically primary. We want to switch to secondary. We want to select the text and then again go to the secondary and then select the text color. Also we have another color. If we take a look at our default and then if we scroll down under fill, we have another color called tertiary. So we can select that and also select the text and then go ahead and select white. After selecting the white, now we have a purple chip, which is a bit lighter, and a blue chip that is a bit darker. And finally, we have to reassign the values. If I take a look at the chip component variant, here we have true and false. We exactly want to keep the same values. The only thing is instead of black, we want to turn it into purple. So here we would just rename this to purple and we exactly keep everything the same, which means if I want to test it, I can hold Option and bring one out. And then as you can see right now, instead of black, we have purple. So we can turn it on and off. And then this way we can switch between them. And also we can edit the labels as we type. Not only that, because this variant set is exactly created the same way as the link, if you decide to switch between chip and link, you can click on that and switch between link. And then as you can see, the text is preserved. So you have also the ability to switch between link and your text is preserved. And then by going back to chips, you can switch between them with no problem. This is possible because we have our text component property created as label. And then we linked both of the text on chip side and on the link side all together, which means if I go ahead and for example, click on this, if I scroll down, you see we have the label all lowercase. If I rename this to something else, the link would be broken between them. So make sure your component text properties are named the same. This way you have easier time doing instant swap and everything would be preserved. For a quick demonstration, if I click on the chip here on the label side, if I double click and just increase the first letter by L, like capital L label, if I click outside, now if I go back to my chip instance, if I click on it and click on the chip, now I want to do a swap to link. Right now you see the text is not preserved. So I'm going to Command Z that. Here I would double click again on the actual master chip component, double click here, making sure that the text component property is exactly written the same way, all lowercase as label, which is exactly the same way as if I click on the link, we have all lowercase written as label. So this way, again, if I do a one final test, if I click on my chip and then just write sign up, and then if I do an instant swap to link, here you see my sign up is preserved and I also have the ability to switch between black and white. I have the ability to switch between purple and blue. Since we managed to fix that, we can now move on to basically replacing the chip component with the actual text. In this example, we have now with Notion AI. So what I would do is I would copy that to my clipboard and then I can click on the chip and on the right hand side, we have the label. So I can Command V that to paste the text inside the label. And as you can see, we have our chip created. Here we have two text values. So what we need to do is just increase the font size and font weight to make them stand out. So what I would do is I would click and drag this outside. We no longer need this, so I can simply delete that. And then I can click on that, move to the typography section and increase the font weight to 61 pixels. Also, I do want this to be center aligned. And if I click on the font weight, I do want this to be extra bold. So now if I zoom out, we basically have Notion with AI that would be placed to the top. And we have the text that is promoting Notion. And on top of that, we have the navigation bar. So what we can do is we can delete the wireframe navigation that we created previously. We can turn the navigation into a component itself by going and clicking on the component. We can hold Option to drag this out. So we have an instance, Command and X to cut that, and then move to the Notion AI and the text that we have, the hero text. We can highlight both of them, Shift and A to create an auto layout, and we can double click and rename this to section. And then we want to make sure that we have our navigation placed to the top. So here I can click on the section, Command and V to paste that. And as you can see, the section has the chip, the text, hero text, I can double click to rename this to hero. And then we have the navigation on the left side. So if I use the arrow on my keyboard, I can push the navigation to the top. And I want to basically give this whole thing a background. So here we have the section, we have the nav, but I don't want the nav to be part of the section, which is part of the chip and hero. So what I need to do is create a parent auto layout and move the navigation outside. So what I would do is click on the section again, Shift and A to create another auto layout, and double clicking and renaming this to body or container. In HTML, we refer to the most parent element as body. So we have body as the most parent element. We do want to make sure that the body has no padding. So we would basically reset all the paddings to 0, and we can control the body's width. In this example, for a desktop size, we can increase it to 1400 pixels, and we give this body a background color. In this example, we go to fill and then search for gray 100. And now you see that our website is beginning to shape. So what I can do is now I can click on the navigation bar. Here you see we have the body on the left hand side and we have a section, and what I need to do is basically click and drag the navigation out to bring it to the body. And as you can see, if I take a look at the website that we just created, we see that the whole body is actually wrapping the navigation and the section, and the section here is wrapping the chip component and the hero. Also, what I need to do is if I go ahead and try to look at this, the navigation is not responsive. Here, if I try to resize this, the middle section is responsive. However, if I click on the navigation, I have to make sure I go to the width section on the auto layout and from fix switch it to fill. So I went ahead and I cleaned up our Figma project, and as you can see, I added another page called the website. Basically, this is the final layout of our website. And if I go ahead, for example, click on the navigation, here you see we have something called local instance. That means if I click on that, that would bring me to the main component. And as you can see here, we are navigated to the components page, and I also cleaned this page up. Here we've so far managed to create link, chip, and navigation component, and we are reusing this in our website. So if I go ahead and click on the website, here you see we managed to create our navigation in a responsive way. If I also take a look at the left hand side, we have the most parent element renamed as body, because in HTML the most parent element is body, and inside that we have a navigation, and then also we group the section with auto layout, again chip and hero. Also, as you can see in the auto layout, we made sure that it is set to center align to the top, and we made sure that the properties on the width is actually set to fill as well, because if you have this as fixed and if I try to resize the body, you see the whole middle auto layout is not being responsive. So you have to make sure you select the section and then you click and make sure that is fill as well, and by doing that you are now basically having a responsive website. Also, what we need to do is add a space between the navigation and the section. So if I go ahead and visit the dev mode, if I try to look at this and closely inspect it, here you see we have a bit of a space here, and in the dev mode you can always switch to pixel and rem. In this example, I do want to make sure that I go to the inspect settings and instead of rem switch to pixels. This way I can inspect my website a bit better. Here you see we have 16 pixels of spacing between the Notion AI and our element here, and if I hover over that on the top, here you see we have only 10 pixels. So we do really want to have more spacing between our Notion and the text, as well as the entire section and a navigation bar. So let's just go ahead and do that. We can switch back to the design mode and we can click on the section and increase the spacing from 16 pixels to 24. And what you notice is if I click the body auto layout and I take a closer look, here we have that 10 extra pixels of gap between the elements. So you can increase that to 48. By doing that, you make sure that any elements that you add actually has 48 pixels of gap between them, which means, for example, if I have another section in our body, I can simply click and Control D, and as soon as I duplicate that, you see there's a 48 pixel gap between all of the elements. Step 6. Since we duplicated another section, we no longer need the content within the section, the chip and the hero. We need to replace this with a testimonial. And what you notice is the testimonial is already an auto layout and is already being set to the horizontal direction. Here you see it is being set to horizontal, and there is a gap of 24 pixels between each of them. If I zoom in, we need to fix a couple of issues with this. First of all, we need to make sure that this is center aligned. So here, if I basically cut that testimonial using Control and X, click on the second section, Control V to paste it, we have our testimonial added. Also, we no longer need the chip and hero. So what I need to do is click on the chip and hero and delete that from my auto layout. Also, what I do want is here you see that we have this free for teams to try. If I use Shift and R to bring the ruler, I can basically drag this out, and here you see we have this text starting from here, and what I can do is also drag this out here. It would be nice if we have all of the logos only take all the available space that we just dragged out, so this way our layout is more aligned. Moreover, we don't need the Notion logo, so what I need to do is click on the Notion logo, delete that, and making sure that if I click on the testimonial, it is center aligned, and by doing that we are almost fixing it. The other thing that I need to do is making sure it is center aligned from the middle as well, so it's not only center aligned to the top, center aligned in the middle. And by fixing these two values, we managed to now create a more consistent look. However, what you notice is if I again try to zoom in, for example, the Uber logo actually has a height of 48 pixels. However, if I click on the 1Password, it only has a height of 19 pixels. So this is not consistent in terms of the look and feel. So what we need to do is make sure that all of them have the same height. So this way they would be exactly center aligned. And in order for me to fix that, I'll click on the first image, which is Snowflake. And then here we see under the layout, we have a height of 24 pixels. So I would want to reduce all of them to 18. In Figma, you can use K to bring up the scale panel. And then here you see under height, I can just basically reduce that to 18 pixels and it would automatically reduce that. Since I fixed the first one, I would need to fast forward and repeat that for all of them. Here on the Toyota, I basically would select it, bring the scale panel using K and then reduce that to 18. And then I can just repeat that, press K on my keyboard, do 18 pixels. So I fast forwarded, and as you can see, I also renamed all of these logos to their proper name so we have easier time identifying them. Also, if I click on any of them and press K on my keyboard, all of their height is now set to 18 pixels. So if I close this and try to zoom out, here we see that we are able to exactly reduce that. And if we want this to be perfectly aligned to the rulers that we just placed here, what we can do is select the testimonial and making sure we reduce the height. Here, as soon as we reduce the height, you see it exactly snaps to the rulers that we just created. If we don't have the rulers here, if I try to make it snap, it doesn't work. So I'm going to Command Z that to basically bring the ruler back, and then I would select the testimonial and I want to make sure again it is set to fixed, and then by doing that it would automatically snap to the ruler. And instead of hard coding any values, I will click on the gap and I make sure it's set to auto. And after setting it to auto, it would exactly expand it all the way to the edges. Another fix that we need to do is basically remove the excess padding that we have around the testimonial. So we would click the padding and make sure we reset it to 0. And then as you can see, we have our testimonial created. So if I hide the ruler using again Shift and R, now we managed to create our body, which has our navigation, our hero section, and basically we have the testimonial section. Also our section 2, we do want to add ends as well, and then our pricing. So if I go ahead and visit the starter, we so far managed to create the sections up top. We only have the toggle section and the other 4 cards to be created, and once we design that, we basically would add that to our website and we can see how finally our website looks like. You can also do final improvement. Basically, you can click on the text here, and since this is a bold text, you can reduce the amount of line height that it has. Here we are setting it to 61 pixels in font size, so for line height we can reduce that to like 64 pixels, and by doing that, if I zoom in, here you see that the line height is reduced. Also for letter spacing, I can click that and then reduce that to minus 0.5 pixels, and then if I basically apply that, here you see that our text is being closer to one another. Because we are using a big font like 61 pixels, you should always reduce the line height and letter spacing. This way your font and typography looks more aesthetic. One other improvement that we can do here in the chip, it is not being stand out. Even though we have a different color, you can immediately tell the difference between these colors. However, it would be nice if we actually make the chip bold. So what I can do is select the chip, go and hover over the local instance, and it would bring me back to the chip component that we have. Finally, what I can do is highlight both of the text and make the font size a bit bigger to 14 pixels and make the font weight a bit bolder to semi-bold. By doing that, now if I go back to the website, if I basically try to zoom out, now we see that now with Notion AI has more emphasis. We can preview this in our browser by basically clicking on the body and making sure to go on the preview. Here we have 2 options. We can preview it using a quick preview. If I click that, you see now the preview panel appeared. So now you see I can basically resize the website and I'm able to see how it looks like. Also, what you can do is instead of preview, you can actually present it. And once you are brought to the presentation mode, here you see that it actually opens the entire screen. And what you can do is basically hover over that tiny settings icon and making sure you are previewing it as an actual size. But what you notice is the actual size is overlapping the screen. Here you see it's actually overflowing, so I have to do a bit of a scroll. So Figma has this built-in option. You can do it like a responsive view, And if I go ahead and do a responsive view, you see now we have our website created, and this is how we are seeing it in the responsive view. Again, the responsive view only works the best if you have everything built with auto layout. That's why we are emphasizing on building everything with auto layout, because what auto layout does is allows your elements to be adaptive and responsive. And since we go to actual presentation mode, this would give us most accurate representation of how it would look like if we build it using HTML CSS. Step 7. So in the previous videos, we managed to create the navigation section and also the hero section. We need to create the pricing page with the toggle. If I visit our Figma file here, we see that we have another section which is called pay by month and also pay yearly. If we take a look at our components page, we have our chips and link. So the way we would do that is we would hold option and basically drag one of the chips out. Now we need to detach this, so we will hold command and / right detach. Basically we would select detach instance, and for this one we need to have active and basically inactive. So for the active one, all we need to do is make this a white color by giving it 100% gray. Also, if we select the text, we want to make sure we select the primary 5. And then for the inactive one, what we need to do is bring this and remove the background color by again going to the fill and removing it. And then for the text color, we want to go with 94. However, if we go with 94, it might not be visible when we add a background color, which means if we try to actually highlight both of them and do a shift and A to create an auto layout, we do want to go with the fill 94. So this is what we want at the moment. And as you can see, the text here is not visible. So what we need to do is add another color to our color styles. Here we have primary 94, so we would detach this and then we would click on our fill and then we would reduce that to like 85. And then as you can see, if I drag this out, 85 is still not as visible, so we can reduce that to 75%. Also from the font perspective, we do want to reduce this from semi-bold to regular. And now since we're happy with this, what we can do is add that to our color palette by clicking on the fill, add, and then style, and then just renaming this to primary /75, and then we would create that style. And now if we click outside, we need to double click on our auto layout and then rename this to toggle, change the direction from vertical to horizontal, and making sure instead of fixed, we go with hug. And we would select both of the chips. Here on the left hand side, we have the toggle, so we would select both of the chips, and then again from fixed, we would select hug. And then as you can see, our toggle is growing. What we need to do is also round the toggle and add more padding. So in this example, we need to click on toggle, and as you can see, the padding is 0, so we would only give it 8 pixels around. So we would click and give it 8 pixels, and then from the appearance, we would just max it out to create a toggle shape. And then once we're done here, this would be our active toggle and this would be our inactive. So we need to create 2 component set out of this and then nest it inside the toggle, which means I need to basically drag this out holding option and drag this out as well. So this would be our toggles. Highlight both of them and then command / to create multiple components. And then once I create multiple components, I would combine them as variants. And for the background color, I do want to choose the toggle background color, which is primary 94. So here I would click on that, go to the fill, and then select primary 94 because this is the background color I want to use for my toggle. So here I would just rename this to toggle. So I would basically move the toggle around and then bring it close to the other components that I created. And what you notice is they are very similar in terms of the component property. So what I can do is instead of me clicking on the toggle and renaming the property, you can always click on the previous components that you have. In this example, if I visit the layers panel and I collapse the pages, we see that we have purple set to true and then purple set to false. So if we repeat the same process for the toggle, if I close that and visit the toggle component, I can create that true and false value. So I can basically double click, copy the value, go to my toggle, and then just paste that there in both of them. And then if I do that, and now if I click on the toggle here, you see my toggle is actually renamed to purple property. So there's 2 ways you can actually assign variants, either renaming your layers this way or actually using the variants panel. However, in this example, I don't want this to be purple, so I can double click instead of purple, call this active, and I want to make sure that the white one is set to true because this is the active one and the other one is set to false, which is the inactive one. Also, if I click on the chip component and I click on the master one, here we see that we have a label, which is all lowercase, and it is linked to the text here. So what I need to do is double click to copy the label, exactly the same name, click on my toggle, and then hover over the properties, click the plus, and then go with text. And then this way I would just copy paste that label all lowercase, and then I would just give it a value of default for now. Once I create that text property, here Figma gives me an error message that this is not being used in the toggle component. So what I need to do is select the text in both of the toggles and navigate to the typography section and click on that tiny icon to apply. And then this way, as soon as I click that, I would automatically link it to the label. And now if I take a look at the left hand side, you see the layer panel under the toggle. This is exactly the same thing as the chip here. If we take a look at the chip here, we see that we have purple false and purple true. If we take a look at the link, we have black false and black true. So we are repeating the same pattern. I would collapse all the layers to have a clean layer panel to work with. And now what I would do is I would just simply hold Option and drag this out, cut that, and then double click in the toggle and then hold Command Shift and R to replace that. So if I take a look at the toggle on the left hand side here, we see we have the actual toggle frame, and instead of auto layout we have a toggle instance. So I can simply delete the other one and then select the toggle, Command and D to duplicate that. And if I take a look at the toggle right now, here you see we have toggle which is active on both sides. So I can simply click on one of them and disable the active. So this way we can toggle between active and inactive. Once I'm happy with this, I can actually click on the toggle auto layout, cut that, and I go ahead and visit my website page. And then here if I zoom out and if I click on my body here, you see on the left hand side we have a navigation, we have a section, and we have another section. We need to duplicate that other section and then open that. Let me scroll down, click on the testimonial, delete that, and make sure to Command V and paste that toggle inside the third section. And if I take a look at the actual frame here, you see it actually is added after the testimonial, and we have default as our text. So all we have to do is basically copy the value, which is pay monthly, go with the actual default one, which is the first one, replace the label to pay monthly, and go ahead and replace the other one, which is pay yearly, with the other toggle by visiting the label and replacing the value here. Also, what you can do to make this a little bit stand out, because you want your users to pay yearly, you can simply double click, highlight that, go to the fill section. Since we have a tertiary color, we would basically highlight that, so this would stand out a bit more. This way, if I click outside, it looks better and users would click on it. Also, in terms of spacing, we would want to reduce the gap to 0 because we only would have one toggle active at the same time. So if I basically collapse everything, we have managed to design the section, so we can simply delete that. Step 8. So far we managed to create the hero section, and then we added our toggle. The final parts of this Notion pricing website is the cards. So if I navigate to the Figma file, I see we have 4 cards here. The first thing we need to do is we need to recreate a component, and then once we recreate that, we can replicate all of these using that same master component. So what I would do is I would highlight all of them, Command and X to cut them, and then go to the components page. And then here I just need to add one card. So what I would do is paste them here for now. And if I take a closer look at each card, I see that it is created using one image, and then we have our text, which is a button, the price, and the actual plan, and then some information about each card. So let's just go ahead and reduce the size of each image and turn them into single components, because we are going to use instant swap to switch between each card. So what I would do is I would hold Option to drag each image out of the cards here, and then by doing that, I can now turn each of them into a component and use instant swap to swap between them. Also, what I need to do is to reduce the size from 80 pixels to 40. So I would press K on my keyboard, and then here we have the scale panel. So here on the height, I would just type 40, and I would repeat the same process for all of them. And then as you can see right now, I reduce all of them to the height of 40. And I would select all of them and hold Command and / to create multiple components. And then after selecting create multiple components, here we see that we have our components created. It makes sense to actually rename them based on the card. So if I go ahead and take a look at this, this is basically the image that is going to be used for the free. And then if I go to the second one, this is the image for the plus plan. And then this is the image for the business one. And then finally, this is the enterprise image. So I would basically go ahead and double click on each of the components and exactly rename them based on the card's plan. So we finally managed to rename all of them. We can select all of them and combine them as variants. By doing that, we can go to the variants and then combine them And then here we can just rename this to icons, give it a background color. And then here you see it automatically renamed it for me. So here what I would do is double click on the variants and then rename this to plans. And then here you see we have the settings, so we can click on that and organize the values from free to plus and business and enterprise. And by doing that, if I basically hold option and drag one of them out, I have the ability to switch between the different plans, and this way I can switch the images. So for my card, we have the first part done, which is basically having the icons as components, and the other part is actually giving this card a background color with some padding and border radius. So what I would need to do is basically have one of my instance icons out, hold Shift and A to create a auto layout, and then go to the fill section and select 94. This way we have our background color selected. I also want to make sure the width is not set to hug, so I would basically switch it to fixed because I do want the width to be basically dynamic as we nest them inside another auto layout. So here I would double click and rename this to card. On the paddings, I would just make sure it's 24 pixels of paddings across. And then in terms of radius, I would just give it 12. If I take a look at our card here on the auto layout, it's being displayed in a horizontal direction, so I need to switch it to vertical. And then press T on my keyboard or the text and click inside the auto layout, and then just basically type in title. And then if I click outside, I would go to the typography section, and for my title I would go with 14 pixels and I would give it bold. I would hold Command and D to duplicate that, and then for the price I would increase the font size to 30 pixels or 32 pixels in this example. And then here I would just give it price. We also want to make sure we use the same colors, so I would hold Shift and select both of them, the title and the price, go to the fill and make sure I select the 5. And then finally we have another text and another button. So if I take a look at this, we have the plan and the price, and then now we need to add the button and the text. So for the text, it's going to be fairly simple. So what we need to do is click on the title, duplicate that, move that to the bottom using auto layout, and instead of bold we would reduce that to regular because these are going to be bullet points. So we can double click, just for now rename this to bullets. And then finally, if I go ahead to my links, here we have our links, so I can hold option and drag this out, and then as you can see we have our links. So what we can do is simply drag it and place it between the price and the bullets. So we have our card almost ready. What we notice is our link is actually only displayed in black and the off-white color. So the off-white color, if I switch it to that one, you see the background color is not going to be visible. So we need to have another variant to basically make this white because we no longer want to detach this instance and override it using basically gray. And as you can see, as soon as I do that, this is the button that I want to use. However, if I click on my local instance, I don't have that here. So what I need to do is basically expand the variant set and then just drag it out, click on one of them and click plus to add another variant set. And right now I need to update the variant values. So for this one, I need to basically go to the fill section and just change the color to white. And also I need to make sure on the variant panel, we only have black. So we need to change this to the basically type, or we can change this to theme. And then for this one, you can make sure to select white. And if I go back to the previous one, you can select off-white in this example. And then for the first one, you can select black. And by doing that, now I added another button to my links component. Also, I can click on my component and go to the resize to basically resize the variant set. Now I can go and visit the card. Here I can click and make sure I click on that 3 dots and reset everything. And once I hover over the reset, it tells me, do you want to reset everything? And yes, I do want to reset everything, because once we reset everything, we now can select the correct component without actually overriding it. So here we have off-white. So we can simply go with the white component, and this way we have our card ready. So what we need to do right now is basically click on our card, and we make sure to create a component out of this by clicking on the create component. Also here we see that there is a 10 pixels of gap between all of them. What you can do is you can group all these images together and then add some space between them, which means I can simply select the pricing. Let's just go ahead and collapse the pages. So I would select the pricing, the title, and the actual icon, add another auto layout inside our auto layout card, holding Shift and A, and then here I would just rename this to top. And I do want to make sure it actually fills the container, because if I don't do that, it is not going to be responsive. So here, instead of hug, I do want to make sure I select fill. Also, I have to make sure to select the title and the price, and make sure instead of hug, they are set to fill as well. By doing that, if I simply drag one card out, and if I start typing, here you see it automatically wraps to the next line and the entire card gets expanded. So this way I can simply increase and decrease the size without worrying about the text being overflowed. Also, I need need to repeat that for the bullet. So here I can select the bullet and I want to make sure instead of hug, I set that to fill. And then finally, I would select the default link, which is the theme of white color. And I want to make sure on the auto layout, I set that to fill as well. And if I go ahead and visit the master component, I would select the top one. And right now, instead of 10, I would want to reduce that to 4. This way I am grouping all these elements to the top. And now I can select the top parent card, and instead of 10, I can add 16. So this way, by adding 16, I am able to group the elements to the top and add some space between the cards. Finally, all I have to do is click my card, and then here we have another property, which is nested instances. The reason we have this property available to us is because we are linking another instance in our component. Not only link, we are actually putting our icons inside our card component, which means if I go ahead and select my card instance, here you see on the right hand side, I don't have the ability to switch between the images. I also don't have the ability to switch between different themes of the link. So I have to make sure to go to my card, go to the plus, and then do nested instances. And by exposing the nested instances, I would make sure to select icons and links. And then here, as soon as I do that, you see on my card, I have icons and links exposed. So right now, if I go ahead to my instance, you see right now I can actually switch between different images. Here, as soon as I switch that, the image gets updated for me. Also for my link, I can switch between different colors. We do want to add text property as well. So if I go ahead and select the title, I do want to make sure to go to the typography section, select that and add title. And then for the value, I would just leave it as default, create that. So we have our title created and also our price. We would go ahead and create another text property, rename that to price. We can leave the default value as 0 for now. And then finally for bullets, we'll select that, go to the typography one and add another text property and rename this to bullets. And also for this one, we would just give it default value for now. So if I go ahead and zoom out, we have our card created and all I have to do is basically copy paste the values to my instance card. So for the free one, I can simply select my instance and then here on the right side, we see that we have title, price, and bullet. Also, we have the local instances. So the first thing we need to do is we have to make sure to select the business and go to the free one to select the correct icon. And for the title, we would go and type in free. And then for the price, we would just leave it as 0. And then for the actual link, we would just rename this to sign up. So since we renamed this to sign up, we need to now copy paste the bullets. So what I need to do is basically select the bullets here, Command and C to copy it in my clipboard and make sure to paste it with matching style, which means if I right click here, we have the option to paste and match the style, which is Command Shift and V. So if I do that, basically holding Command Shift and V, I would paste the value and the bullets would exactly get the same styling of the master component. And all I need to do is basically go to each bullet here in this example, the first one, and then add a dash and a space to create into a bullet point. And if I repeat that with all of them, I am able to create bullet points for each of them. So I fast forwarded, and as you can see, we have our first card instance created. Since we built this with auto layout, I can simply resize this and you see everything is being resized correctly. However, what you notice is the bullets are a bit cramped together. So what I can do is I can basically click on local instance and I'm brought back to the master component. And then here on the default, I would select the bullets and I want to make sure instead of auto, I would have like at least 22 pixels of line height. And by doing that, if I now navigate back to my cards, I see that I have a bit of a space between my bullets. Since we have this as a master component created, all I have to do is hold Option and duplicate that and simply change the values on the right side. So if I basically drag this out here, instead of free, I would go with plus, and instead of 0, I go with $10. And then here plus is a popular plan, so I can simply switch that to a black link. And then by switching it to black, I can rename this to get started. And then for the image, I can simply switch it to plus as well. And this is how easy it is for me to switch between different card components and nest components inside one another. And all I have to do is basically do the same thing, highlight over all the bullet points that I have on the plus, Command and C to copy, and then I would just basically navigate here, select all of this, Command Shift and V to paste that. And then as you can see, it actually preserved the style here for me. So I'm going to fast forward that and make sure I recreate the business and enterprise as well. Step 9. So after fast forwarding, we managed to recreate all the cards using one single master component. So we no longer need these wireframe cards that we created previously. So I'm going to delete that. Also, I would be highlighting all these cards, Command and X to cut them from the components page, because in the components page, as you can see, we only have the master components, which is the navigation and card and the icons that we just created. And I would go ahead and visit the website, collapse the pages, and as you can see in the website, we have the layouts ready. So I would click anywhere on the canvas, Command and V to paste them. And if I go ahead and drag them in the website, as you can see, they would get stacked like that, and this is not the behavior we want. So I'm going to Command and Z again, and before dragging it to the website, all I have to do is highlight all of them, Shift and A to create an auto layout, and then as you can see, we have frame 1, so I would rename this to section to be consistent with the website that we have. Now if I go ahead and drag this, everything works as expected. I would use the arrows on my keyboard to push this down, so I would go ahead and make sure that I select fill, and by doing that, the master section, which is the parent auto layout, is spanned across. And if I go ahead and click on the body here, you see if I try to resize this, the cards are not being responsive. So I need to select the parent auto layout. I'm making sure to select wrap. As soon as I select wrap, you see the icon is changed, which means if I now click on the body and I try to resize this, the auto layout cards are being stacked, which is exactly the behavior I want. Also, if you take a look at the left hand side here, we see that the wrap icon is different, which is different than the normal auto layout icons. However, if I try to zoom in, here you see we have inconsistent sizings in terms of the card height. It would be nice that all of them have the same height. So what I need to do is select the parent section and making sure I select all the children's. And here we have again the content set to hug. So here all I have to do is from the hug, I would just make it fill. As soon as I select fill, you see all the cards expand and they have the exact same height. However, the alignment is a bit off. So if I try to zoom in here, the business icon and the enterprise icon, they're not aligned properly. Same thing with the free icon. So all I have to do is basically select one of the instances, hover over the local instance to basically get navigated to the master component card. And here you see we have the auto layout, which is aligned to the left center. All we have to do is align it to the top left. And then here I can click on return to the instance. And now if I try to zoom out, I see that all of the cards are aligned accordingly to the top left and the height of them are equal as well. Now if I try to test it, if I try to zoom out, here we have the body. I now go ahead and try to resize this. You see it is being wrapped. However, you notice that as we try to wrap them, the cards are not being wrapped properly. So what I need to do is making sure that I select the parent section, and instead of fixed, I would set it to fill as well. So this way our children cards, all of them are set to fill. Our parent auto layout section is set to fill. And then finally, the body is set to fix in terms of height. If I click on it, here you see that we have the body set to fixed height. So right now, if I try to click on the body and if I try to resize this, you see the auto layout children elements are being resized. So basically what I can do is try to resize them accordingly based on the breakpoint. For example, on 1600 pixels, we are good. And as soon as I try to make it a bit lower, which is 1000 pixels, we have to increase the height of this. So we would basically bring it down. And this is how the height of the auto layout card would be adjusted. The other thing that we need to pay attention to is basically center aligning this and adding some space on the left and right side. So if I go ahead and select the parent auto layout section on the spacing, which is left and right side, I would just add a 96 pixels of padding. And then finally, I would center align them by clicking on the top center. Also, what I notice is if I, for example, click on this, here we see that the width of the card is set to 288 pixels. We can set a minimum width for each of the cards. For example, we want all of them to be a minimum width of 290 pixels. By doing that, if I, for example, try to resize this, you see as soon as they get resized, the second card doesn't take all the available space. However, if I go ahead and select all of the cards and set a minimum width on the auto layout by selecting add minimum width, and then I go ahead and select 290 pixels. And then on top of that, I would go ahead and select the width, and instead of fixed, I would make it into fill. By combining minimum width and fill container, we're able to adjust the available space in each card, which means if I click on the body and if I try to resize this, they resize back to the 4-column layout. If I try to make them smaller, they resize to 3-column and 1-column. If I again try to make them smaller, they would resize to 2-column layout. Same thing if I try to make them a bit smaller on one screen, they would resize to a single column layout. So this way, with only using fill container and minimum width, we were able to create a responsive behavior. Also, if we take a look at the prototype, we were able to see how our cards are being presented, and we managed to create the Notion pricing page. Step 10. And HTML elements, you can think of them as containers. So you can create an empty container and put content in between, as we can actually create a HTML element and write our content inside, which is sign up. But you don't have that flexibility in HTML to rename your elements the way you want to. The elements in HTML are preserved, so you have to go by the names that are defined. And the way you create your elements is always starts with a less than sign. Here, if I go ahead and zoom in, you can see that we have a less than sign. And then again, we close that with a greater than sign. And between the less than sign and greater than sign, you put your character. And your character can be basically a preserved HTML element. And then if we go ahead on the closing end, we have less than sign and then forward slash and a greater than sign. And what comes after the forward slash is again the same character that you start with. So for example, if we do want to create a paragraph in our HTML, we start with less than sign and then we have our P paragraph and then we close that with a greater than sign. We put our content, in this example, we just write hello world, and then on the far end, we close that with the same paragraph tag, which is the P again. But again, the closing tag is different. So we have less than sign, forward slash, and then greater than sign, and then after the forward slash comes the same character that you start your HTML tag with. So in order for us to use any coding in this course, it really doesn't matter when it's HTML, CSS, JavaScript. You need to have a text editor, and I highly recommend using Visual Studio Code because it really doesn't matter if you're using Windows or Mac. The same thing with Figma. Once you download the software, you can customize all the keyboard shortcuts, as well as you can customize the theme. So make sure to search for Visual Studio Code and go ahead and download it. So once you download VS Code, you might get again a page startup like this that it suggests you to open a new folder or create a new file. It really doesn't matter if you get this startup. I'm just going to close this welcome page, and I want to showcase that if you decide to use VS Code, you always have to open a folder to be able to use it. And the way you can check the folder is again on the top left side, you would click on Explore. And then here you see we don't have a folder, so you can click on open folder and select your folder, or simply on your basically desktop machine, whether you're using Mac or Windows, you can create your folder. So I'm going to call this design, and then as soon as I have this, I can click and drag it and then just leave it here. And what you notice is now Explore doesn't have that open folder option anymore. If you like to always get this welcome, you can have this as checked, but if you uncheck it, you won't get the welcome anymore. I leave it as is, so I'm going to close the welcome. And now here, if I click on Explore, you see now I don't have anything here. It might be confusing, but we were going to walk through how to use VS Code if you're a designer and you have no idea how to use a code editor. But one of the important things that you can think about when it comes to Visual Studio Code is their extension. In Figma, you can call these as plugins. In VS Code, they're called extensions. And you can find it by basically clicking on the extensions here. And then you see we have this two tiny tabs. Again, if you're not able to see this clearly, you can hold Command and again plus to zoom in. This will make your Visual Studio Code larger. And I'm going to close this because we no longer need this. We already dragged our empty folder in our Visual Studio Code. And as you can see, I have some popular extensions. I can click on this to collapse this and click on the recommended. And as you can see under install, when I click on it, nothing happens because I have 0 extension installed. So for example, if I go ahead and open an HTML file, again, it really doesn't matter. I'm just going to go through it quickly, and let's just go ahead and have all the HTML created. We will cover this in depth when we go through HTML. And if I see this, if I go ahead and save this, you see that the HTML tags are highlighted differently. So how do we change the look and feel of our Visual Studio Code? We can select some pre-default themes, and you find these by going basically to File and Preferences on Windows, I think. However, on Mac, you would just click on your code and then Settings, and then here you would be able to have your theme selected. But it would be better if you could search for it, because again, you might be using Windows or Mac, so the placement of these icons and settings might be different. So you can always search for it the same way you search for stuff in Figma or any software that you use. The command shortcut for search is different. In VS Code, if you're installing it for the first time, it's going to be Command Shift P. Here you can always take a look at the bottom left of my screen. If I press a shortcut, you would be able to see that. Here you see I hold Shift, Command, and P, and that will open the search results for me. And let's just go ahead and exactly change this shortcut, because in Figma we have this mapped to Command /. That will open up the search, and you can search for actions in Figma. So let's just go ahead and make sure VS Code also has this shortcut the same way as Figma. So what you can do is search for shortcut, and then here you have two different options, the JSON and the preference version. So we don't want to click on JSON for now. We would like to click on Preferences, Open Keyboard Shortcuts. And again, you can always get help. Here you see we have help, keyboard shortcut references. If you click on it, it will open up the keyboard shortcut for you. Again, here the command is show command palette. And as you can see, I brought up the shortcut references for both Mac and Windows, and they are basically identical. So if I have to teach you one important shortcut in Visual Studio Code, again in Figma, if I go back and hold Command and /, it brings the quick action, and I can immediately start adding my items and run my plugins. In Visual Studio Code, you have to run something called show all commands, and it is by holding Shift, Command, and P. In Windows, it is the same thing. Instead of command, it's control. So Control Shift P is the command on Windows. And based on my operating system, since I'm using Mac, it only defaulted to Mac shortcuts. If you're using Windows, it would be defaulted to Windows shortcuts. And again, the first shortcut that you need to learn, and it's a must, again, is Shift, Command, and P. That will bring up the search. Here in Visual Studio Code is called Show Commands. So make sure you open this on your end, and let's just go ahead and customize the first one so it actually looks exactly like Figma, so we don't need to memorize two different shortcuts, and this way we have a consistent shortcut to follow. Again, I'm going to hold Command Shift P to bring up the shortcut. Again, you can search for help, keyboard shortcut references, but again, what I need to search for is shortcut. And then in this example, I don't want to click on the JSON. I want to click on Open Keyboard Shortcuts Preferences. And when I click on it, here, I can also collapse this one. Here, let me just go ahead and click the Explore to collapse this. And we already saw that reference. The search is Show Command. So there we go. And as you can see here, we have the action here, which is Show All Command, which is binded to Shift, Command, and P. And the way you can change it is by clicking on this pen icon. However, on the right hand side, you can also take a look at this, which is source. That means this is a system default shortcut. And as soon as you make an override to the existing shortcuts that Visual Studio Code offers, this would change to user. So let's just go ahead and click on this pen icon. As soon as you click on the pen icon, it tells you to have your keyboard combination pressed, and then finally press enter. So what I would do is I would hold command and then /, and then here you see it command / appears, and now it tells me that I have 3 existing commands that has the same bindings. We can take a look at those and then basically remove those from the other ones. But what matters is I do want this show all command to be command /, which is aligned to Figma. And then once I'm happy, I can press return on my keyboard or enter. And now I see that the first one, which is command /, shows all the commands. And now this is changed to user. That means if I basically, let me close everything. If I want to search for something, now you see my show all command is command /. So here, if I hold command /, you see on the left hand side, the shortcut shows up. I can have the search results. And previously we were talking about changing the theme. So here we would just basically search for it instead of going down, the file or code. It might be different on different operating systems. We can just simply search for it. And then we could just go ahead and search for the keyword theme. And then here we have preferences again showing up for us. And then what I need to do before actually selecting anything, I'm going to click on explore and then double click on index.html. So this way I'm able to see the HTML code and how it looks like. So here I'm going to hold command / and then search for theme. I already know that Visual Studio Code has built-in themes. Again, you can toggle between light and dark theme, but what we need to select is color theme. And then when I click on it, these are all built-in Visual Studio Code, so I can just use my keyboard. Here you see I am selecting like solarized light, and then I can go up, light again, modern, Visual Studio Code light, and then here the default is Visual Studio Code dark on my system. And you can browse different again themes here, and then based on the theme that you select, your HTML code and also JavaScript code is changed as well. Or simply you can just click outside and then go on the extensions. This way we learn how to install plugins. In VS Code, plugins are referred to as extensions. So here I would just search for material theme. Again, we have multiple ones published, and these extensions are developed by third-party developers, so they can come and go. Sometimes the extension is available, maybe down the line it might not be supported. So you can always choose the extension that is most recent and then has also a lot of downloads and reviews. And I can show an extension. Let me just remove that. There was an extension called SAS Live, and then as you can see, this was a popular extension that compiled SAS code. I used to use this extension, but right now you see Visual Studio Code gives this warning that this extension is deprecated, so make sure not to install this. So you have again other developers building those extensions, and in this example we have this one. So there are alternatives when it comes to extensions, and then if you want to remove this, you can simply click on this one and remove everything that you search for. Here I'm just going to paste the material theme, and then here I can just simply click and drag this to read more about it. And I would go ahead and select the first one, material theme. Here I would click on install. And then once I install the theme, again, it automatically pops up the themes for me. So I have the ability to select the themes. But if it didn't pop up, I can basically click outside and escape this. It really doesn't matter. It already installed it for me. So what I would do is I would click on this one and close this. Here I have my HTML. So what I would do is I would hold command / and then search for color theme. And then I would select the first one. And since I installed this plugin or extension, I can now basically use more themes that are developed by other people, and I can use it in my actual Visual Studio Code. The one that I use, again, it's up to you what kind of themes you want to use, but the one I use is basically material theme high contrast. So I'm happy with this. I can go ahead and select this, and right now you see my HTML syntax highlighting is different. So I can go ahead and select again the extensions. Since we already installed the material theme, I can click again. Let me just drag this. It already automatically installed the material theme icons as well. And what you notice is this is developed by the same person. That's why once you install the first one, it automatically installs the second extension for you. And what this does, it actually changes the icons of your files. Here, let me just go ahead and click. And then I'm going to basically create another file. Again, you can just ignore basically the files that I create. But I just want to showcase that here you see we have these type of icons, and then we already installed a theme and it automatically installed the icons. So how do we change the icons in our Visual Studio Code? We would hold command and / and search for the keyword icon. And then here again, we have preferences, file, icon, theme. So what I would do is I would just select this. And now here again, we have some default icons that are added to Visual Studio Code. But right now we can go ahead and actually select different icons because we already installed the theme. And then here you see, as soon as I go over these icons, the left-hand side changes. So here, this is again the default Visual Studio Code. If I go ahead and select material theme icon, which is the first one, I have the icons change for me. Again, I'm going to select this. You can also explore other options. Again, if you don't like the themes, you can always go to extensions. Maybe you can install material icon themes by this developer. Here, I'm going to select this and install this so I can show that we have again different ways to explore extensions. And let's assume that this didn't show up for you. Again, here it tells you that this is the current, which is material theme icon. We're now installing another one, which is kind of confusing. It's called material icon themes because this developer renamed this to material icon theme. So if I go ahead and select this here, you see my icons are changed now. So I can go and basically hover over the material icon themes, the current one. You see it has changed to this one, or I can again search for icon, which is again preferences, file, icon, theme. As soon as I select this, now you see again I have all those options, but the new one that I installed is called material icon theme. So I can basically select this, and now you see the icons has changed. If I go and select the previous one, it looks like that. And then finally, if I go with Visual Studio Code, it looks like this. So I'll go ahead and select the first one, material icon theme, and I'm happy with this. Since I don't use the other icon extension, I can go and select extensions, click on this one, and I can disable the icons here. So here I can uninstall this. It tells me to restart, so I would go ahead and restart. In this example, I only use the themes, not the icons. So if I don't need anything, I can simply uninstall this and go ahead and choose another icon. Now let's just go ahead and write our first HTML tag. Now we need to do basically less than sign P, greater than sign. And then as you can see, it auto-generated the end tag for me. So now let's just go ahead and delete that. And if we again hold command and / search for settings, we have again two options. We have the JSON one and basically the open settings UI. So what I need to do is open the UI version. And once you open this, all you need to do is search for linked editing. There we go. So as soon as you search for linked editing, it tells you that whether your HTML tags are updated, again, as you try to complete them. So if I disable that, it might not have that much of an effect. Again, if I go back here and then start to write our P tag, it auto generates it still for me. However, if I double click inside of the P tag and I decide to use another tag, let me just zoom in. If I decide to use the H1 tag, here you see it renames the first one, but it doesn't rename the end tag. So I have to manually rename the end one. And that is the reason that your editor doesn't have the linked editing enabled. So all you have to do is to check that. Once you check that, for example, if I decide to go back to P, all I have to do is to rename this to P, and it automatically renames the end tag for me. Also, a better way for you to generate your HTML tags, if I hold Command and A, that would select everything. This shortcut is exactly like the same in Figma. If you want to select everything in Figma, you hold Command and A. Now if I go ahead and delete that, I have a better version to generate my HTML. So all I have to do is basically type the letter P, and here I have something called emit abbreviation. So here all I have to do is click on this and it actually generates that for me. So I no longer need to do less than sign, P greater than sign. So I can just basically delete that, Command and A to delete. I can do P, tab on my keyboard, and as soon as I do tab, it actually auto generates that for me. So again, if you take a look at the bottom left hand of my screen, I press P on my keyboard and I do tab, and then it auto generates that for me. And then again, make sure to have the linked editing enabled, because right now, if I, for example, disable that, and if I go ahead and decide to use another tag, H1, it doesn't rename the end tag. So make sure you have this enabled, because this way, if you decide to create an H1 and press tab on your keyboard and you decide, oh, you know what, I want to rename my tag to P, I can just double click, rename this to P, and it auto renames the end tag for me. Also, how do we basically try to preview our HTML file in the browser? We have to do two things. We have to generate something called the HTML boilerplate, and then we have to open our HTML file in the browser using an extension called Live Server. So what I have to do is, again, go to the extensions, and let's just delete everything. I search for something called Live Server, and again, this is the extension I'm going to install. The extensions usually come and go because developers develop them, and then if they don't maintain them, they might be deprecated. But for now, this extension is live and it is working. So once you install this, you'll have an icon created for you at the bottom right of your screen, which is called Go Live. So as soon as you install that, I'm going to close this, and all I have to do is basically generate the HTML structure, which allows me to open this HTML file in a browser. And all I have to do is hold Shift and exclamation mark. And then again, we have the emit abbreviation pop up, and all I have to do is press tab on my keyboard. And as soon as I press tab, it auto generates that entire HTML boilerplate for me. You can think of it as a structure. This needs to always be like this for us to open this HTML file in the browser. And if we take a closer look at the HTML boilerplate that we just generated using Visual Studio Code, it consists of multiple tags. And I don't want you to be intimidated. There are many stuff created here. You can really ignore everything. All you have to do is to add your content within the body tag. So if I go ahead and just try to give you an overview of that generated code, at the top of your HTML document, we are telling the browser that this is an HTML document type. And then we have our HTML root element. Everything inside the HTML has a parent, and the parent of the parents is this HTML root document. You can simply ignore the head tag for now, because the head tag lets us use responsive behavior. We are not going into these advanced topics for now. What we care about is the body tag, because this is where our content is being displayed on a web browser. So everything we have to do, we have to write it inside the body tag. The head tag, on the other hand, is not displayed to the browser. So if you decide to do some CSS styling, you can always include that on the head tag. So we're back at our Figma coding. So we generated the HTML file, and right now I am at the body. So what I need to do is press P on my keyboard and then tab, and now I would create my sign up button. And then as soon as I save this, you see it auto formats this for me. Again, if I try have this basically not formatted, if I save this, it auto formats everything for me. So you might not have this behavior again. So you can install another extension, which is called Prettier. I go to my extension, and now I would install something called Prettier. And now here I can click on this, and I have the Prettier code formatter installed. So as soon as I install this, I can now go ahead and bring my quick action, search for settings, and I would go to my UI version. And now I have to enable Prettier. So what I would do is just write editor default and then formatter. There we go. So all you have to do is just search for default formatter or editor default formatter. And now as soon as you install this, if I click on my pop-up, I have the Prettier installed. So what I need to do is select this Prettier and have that enabled. Also, you notice that if I try to save something here, I would just try to kind of mess around with the alignment. Now I would hold Command and save, and on save, it actually formats that for me. So the other thing I need to do is just write save and then format. Basically, it's called format on save. So you just have to write format on save. So as soon as you enable that, again, if I disable it, and if I go back and if I try to ruin it and then save this, you see I'm saving it, but it is not formatting my document. So I have to basically enable that. Now, if I go back and I command S to save this, it formats that for me. So once we have all of this enabled, what we can do is basically, let's close this and collapse this. We can now click on Go Live to open our HTML document. And then as soon as I open my HTML document, I get a pop-up that the server started at this port. It really doesn't matter, I can close this. But what matters is our live icon has now changed. And now I'm able to make changes and reflect that on the browser. So here, if I go ahead and just delete that, and then just write login and then save this. As soon as I save this, here you see on the right hand side, I actually see my live HTML code being rendered. The other thing that you can do here, you see sometimes your HTML code might get a bit longer, so you have that scroll behavior. So you can always wrap that and toggle wrap behavior in the Visual Studio Code. Also, you can always hold Command and minus to make it smaller or larger, or you could search for the wrap functionality by holding Command and / and then search for wrap. Here you see we have something called toggle word wrap. Mine is set to Option and Z. So what I would do is right now hold Option and Z. As soon as I hold Option and Z, you see now my word and my code is being wrapped to the next line. Again, I can toggle it back to the one line. It really doesn't matter. It just makes your HTML markup easier to read. So I would go ahead and revert this back to sign up and then Command and S to save that. So now I see that the change is being reflected. So now let's see how can we actually make this sign up button look exactly like the one that we have on Figma. And then as you can see, if we click on our button and if we go ahead and enable the dev mode, each time we enable something, we have something called the background, which is being wrapped under style. So that means we have to create another tag called style. And then within that style tag, we need to give a property called background. Step 11. But before we get so much deeper into CSS, I just have to give a brief overview of how CSS works. If you decide to create your CSS declaration, again, this entire thing is called CSS declaration block. So you have everything as a CSS declaration block. And in HTML, we have our tags with less than sign, greater than sign. In CSS, we have our declaration ends with a curly brace and also starts with a curly brace. So you can create your curly brace by holding Shift on your keyboard. And I think the curly brace on my keyboard is next to the letter P. So you open your curly brace, you close your curly brace, and then this is how you open your declaration and close your declaration. And everything that comes in between them is considered your CSS declaration block. And inside your declaration block, you have something called the property and value. So now if I go back to Figma and if I come here, you see now my property is set to background, colon, and my value, which is red, and then semicolon, which separates that. If I take a look at the top one, I have a value called inline flex, and I have a property, which is called display. You are already familiar with the padding property. So here we have padding. In Figma, we control the padding of our element. In CSS, we just write the padding, and then we just give it a colon, we give our values, and then we close that with a semicolon. And this is basically a separator that separates them for me. And what matters is basically something called the selector. So you always have to select your HTML elements to tell the CSS, hey, make sure to basically apply this to these type of elements. In Figma, it's pretty easy. I don't need to have any selectors. I can switch back to the design mode. I can simply select my item. And this is, for me, how selection works as a designer. I just click on my item, it's selected for me. And now I can apply my background color. And if I have basically some border radius and width and height, I can apply those. But in HTML and CSS, it is different. So you have to make sure to always have your element selected. In this example, we have our HTML block, which is a paragraph. So we need to select our paragraph, which is a keyword of P. We just write the P character, and that is a keyword. So we select that here. So if I go and see an example, here you see we have multiple paragraphs. If we want to select all of them, we would use a selector P, and we open our declaration here, and then we close our declaration, and now we change the color of this with a property called color, and we give it a value of red, and then we end the declaration with a semicolon separator. So this entire thing is a CSS declaration, and then you have to also make sure that once we apply this to the paragraph, all the paragraphs will have the same style applied to them. And that is how CSS works in general. So if you have multiple paragraphs, as soon as you select that paragraph, it applies to all the available paragraphs on your HTML document. So let's just go ahead and do that. So if I go back to my basically button here, I would, for example, want to apply the button blue. I would go back to the dev mode, and then here I have the background, and then I have this value. What Figma allows you to do is basically click on that, and you can copy that to your clipboard, and now I can apply this here. But we haven't got into how we apply this. We already know that we have to open it and select it, and if I come here and then just write P curly brace, and then try to open and close the curly brace, and then Command and V to paste the value, and then if I save this, you see it doesn't work. It actually is going to spit out that HTML on the page, and I really don't want that to be displayed on the page. I want this to be hidden from the user and apply to the sign up. So how do I do that? I just simply need to create a style tag, and then as soon as I create a style tag, I press tab on my keyboard, and in between this opening and closing style tag, now I would select my P, add a space, hold basically shift and curly, and again Visual Studio Code auto close your curly brace. And that is the good thing about Visual Studio Code. It automates a lot of stuff, so you don't need to hold the curly brace and close it. It auto open and close that for you. And now I can press return on my keyboard, create a line break, and paste my value there, which is background, and then we have our blue. And then as soon as I save that, you see on the right hand side, that value is gone and it's no longer displayed on HTML. And here it is being hidden because we are creating this in a style tag. And what HTML does, once it sees the style tag, it actually removes everything here from the user, and it applies that as a style to your paragraph elements. Again, if I have another one duplicated, here I would duplicate it using Command and D. But again, you can always hold Command and / search for duplicate. Again, the command is duplicate selection. I customize it to Control Command and D. Yours might be different, so make sure you customize it. I've already covered that in the previous videos. So as soon as I duplicate this selection and I now change this to login, and then I save this, now I have exactly 2 paragraphs with the blue background applied here. And then if I want them to exactly have the same look and feel as Figma, all I have to do is to come here and copy this layout value. So I have to go to the CSS again here on the top right in spec settings, and I revert this back to pixel because I do want Figma to generate pixel snippets for me. So as soon as I have that, I would just copy that, and now I would go back to my Visual Studio Code and I would add that to the paragraph declaration block. So here I would just come here, press return on my keyboard to create a new line break, Command and V, and add these. And also, since we have Prettier enabled, if we save this, it auto formats that for us. And there we go. We have our button generated on the browser using HTML and CSS exactly the same way we created it in Figma. But that is not the way you should build stuff. You should really understand all the properties that you are using. In this example, we're using display, justify content, align items. All of these properties, you have to really understand how they work. You can't just simply copy paste that as a designer and hope that your elements look exactly the same way as your design file. So in this series, I'll try my best to explain every CSS property so you have an easier time understanding and collaborate with your developers in an easier way. Here you see that we have our HTML markup written, and then we added the CSS properties. So let's now understand how each CSS property works without actually copy pasting it from Figma. So the first CSS property that you need to learn about is called color. But before I get into CSS properties, I do want to give an overview of how CSS declaration look like. You need to always select your HTML element, and you always start with your curly brace. That means you have started your declaration, and then you close that with your, again, curly brace. That would basically end your declaration. And this entire thing is called CSS declaration block. and in each of them you have properties and values, and you have two types of separator. One which is the colon separator, and then you separate that with semicolon. That means once you add your color, for example, as a property and you gave it the value of red, you close that with a semicolon, and that separates your first declaration in CSS. And the reason we call this declaration block is because we can add as many CSS properties inside one declaration block. So for example, once we select a paragraph tag in this CSS declaration block and we give it the color of red, it selects everything on the HTML. And this is how we would translate the previous slide into an actual CSS. Property is color, value is red, the colon separates the property from the value, and the semicolon ends the declaration. So we can have multiple declarations, and we group all of these declarations in one single declaration block by opening and closing the curly braces. An example would be, again, selecting the same paragraph and adding our first declaration, which means we are giving it the color of red, and then we close that and separate that. And then once we're done with our first declaration, we start writing our second declaration. We learned that in Figma that we can give padding to our elements and when it comes to auto layout. So here we are giving padding and basically setting the padding value to 20 pixels. So all the paragraph elements would get the value of 20 pixels. And the first CSS property that you need to learn about is color. Color allows you to change the text of an element in the HTML. So I'm going to go back to Figma, and then here, as you can see, we have two buttons. And if I click on my first button up top, here we see that we have something called fill. And if I open my button layer here on the right hand side, you see that I have something called the text. And if I click on my text, I have the ability to change the color of it in Figma. And in Figma, the color of your elements is always controlled by the fill. However, in CSS, it's different. The color of your content is controlled by a property called color, and the color of your frames is controlled by a property called background-color. So the second most important property to know in CSS is called background-color. Even though both of these are controlled using fill in Figma, in CSS you have to declare them using background-color and also color. And you have to always make sure that the property is written exactly the same way that you see it here. You can't put a space in between the property. If there is two words, you have to separate them using dash in this example. Also, when you try to write your properties, you have to respect the case sensitivity, which means you can't have like capital B and then capital C when you write your properties. They have to be all lowercase with no spacing. And in terms of having a property that has two words, in this example background color, has to be separated using dash. So now we know how to change the background color and the text color of our elements. So if I navigate back to my Visual Studio Code, here on the right hand side we do see that we have sign up and login, and these are being rendered as paragraph elements. So what I can do is I can open my style tag by just typing style, and I can press tab on my keyboard, and now I have to select both of them. So here I would just write the letter P, space, open the curly brace, press return on my keyboard to open my declaration. Again, here, this is how we are trying to have our declaration created in Visual Studio Code. Also, let me zoom in a little bit here so we have easier time seeing this. So the first thing that we learned is the color property. So what we need to do is write color and then hold shift and colon, and then let's just give it the value of white. You can write white in this example and then add semicolon to separate that, and then as soon as I save that, they will disappear because the background is already white. We can only see the text if we give it a background color. In the Figma example, we give it a fill. So what I need to do is return and create a new line and then just write background dash color. And then what happens is if you actually write a property, Visual Studio Code recognizes it. So instead of you actually holding shift and then basically adding a colon, adding your value, in this example black, and then semicolon, you can simply select this and Visual Studio Code will add the colon and semicolon for you. So if I go ahead and save that, I'm able to see my sign up and login actually having their text color change with their background color. But if I go back to Figma, here we see that we have our first button sign up with a color red, and it has also different padding. Let's also change this second one to login. There we go. And the second button is actually blue and has a different sizes. How can we individually select items in the HTML? Here in Figma, I can simply select it, go to fill and change the color to whatever I want. So I'm going to hold Command and Z to revert the color. In Visual Studio Code, you can't simply select it. You have to give it an attribute. So what is an attribute? Attribute allows you to give your HTML element a unique information. In this example, if we decide to add an image to an HTML, we would have our starting tag, and then we give our attribute, and each attribute follows with an equal sign. And after the equal sign, you have basically opening and closing quotation mark. So it's up to you if you want to have a single quotation mark or a double quotation mark. What matters is you have to write your attribute in between the opening and closing tag. In this example, image is a self-closing tag, which means it doesn't have a end closing tag. If I go to paragraph, for example, paragraph is an opening tag and it has a closing tag. So that is a full HTML element that has an opening and a closing tag. So in HTML, you can also have some tags that we saw earlier, like images, with no closing tag. So basically, you would just start your HTML by writing less than sign. You gave your HTML tag a name, which is a keyword. In this example, we would give it img, and we close that with / and greater than sign. So we have examples of self-closing tag. So if you decide to, for example, create line breaks or horizontal rule in your HTML, you could use BR to create a line break and an HR to create a horizontal rule. So these are, again, the same thing as img. They are self-closing tag. They don't have a closing tag at the end. You don't need to repeat BR at the end. You would just simply do a less than sign, write the keyword, in this example BR, and then you add a space, follow it by / and greater than sign. Same thing with the image. We have less than sign, a keyword of img, all lowercase, and then we close that with a / and greater than sign. And what matters is the attributes that we add. Each attribute, again, has keywords, so you can't just simply write source. src, which stands for source, is a keyword that is unique to img tag. Also, we have something else called alt. Alt is a unique attribute that lets your images have accessibility tags. And the anatomy of attribute is always =, opening quotation mark and closing quotation mark. In most examples, it can be double quotes, but if you do single quotes, it really doesn't matter. So for example, how do you give your attributes value? You simply add your value in between the opening quotation mark and the closing quotation mark. In this example, we are linking this image to a random website, and we are opening our img tag, and in between the source attribute, which is the opening quotation mark, we're passing our URL, and we close our quotation mark. There are attributes that are common between all the HTML elements, and they are ID, class, and style. What I mentioned earlier was the class attribute. As you can see, image is a self-closing HTML element, so we have an ID and class attribute added to it. Also, paragraph is an element that is not self-closing. Here we have our starting element and also our closing paragraph tag. And here in the beginning, which is the starting tag, you can add your attributes. So the way it works is you would start your paragraph, less than sign, and then you add your P, which is a keyword, stands for paragraph, and then you follow that with your attributes. In this example, we care about the class attribute. We would just write the keyword class equal, and then we would pass our class name. So what happens is, as soon as you add your class, in this example, we have our paragraph. You see that we have our class of text added to our first paragraph. The way we selected in CSS is using a special character of dot. So in CSS, as soon as you add a dot, that means you are selecting your classes from HTML. And after the dot, we just type out our class name. So instead of selecting all the paragraphs, we are only selecting paragraphs that have a class of text. So now we know how to give attributes to our HTML elements. We can simply write the class attribute, and we can give our classes any name, and then we select it using dot in our CSS. And by doing that, we can uniquely style our HTML elements instead of selecting all the paragraphs. So if I go back to Visual Studio Code, here you see that we have our paragraph element, and as you can see, it selects everything. So all we need to do right now is go to our sign up, and if I try to zoom in, here you see we have less than sign, P greater than sign, and in the beginning, which is the opening tag, we add a space and we write the keyword of class. As soon as you write the class, Visual Studio Code would give you the suggestion. So if you click on it, it auto generates the equal sign, opening quotation mark, and closing quotation mark. And as you can see, the quotation marks are not single quotes. It really doesn't matter. You can use single or double, but if you're using double quotes, make sure to stick with the double quote. So here I would just give the first one a class of sign up, but if you do that, it's actually not going to work. So you have to make sure the same way you add your properties with no space, you have to add your class names with no space as well. So if I do decide to rename my class to sign up, I have to make sure I have 0 space. So I would just write sign dash up. And if I now go back to Figma, here you see we have our sign up button with the background color of red. So if I go to Visual Studio Code, all I need to do is, instead of selecting all of these, I would just remove that. And we already know how to select classes in CSS. So if I go back to the slides, here we know that we have to use the keyword of dot. This is a special character in CSS that lets us select classes from HTML. So if I go back to Visual Studio Code, all I need to do is write dot and then follow that with the name of the class, which is sign, sign dash up, and then we give it a space and we have our curly braces created. We create our line break and all we need to do is give it a color. Same thing, as soon as you write the CSS property, you can now select it from Visual Studio Code, and Visual Studio Code would give the colon and semicolon separators. So we can just give it the color of white. Also, you can give it any hex value or HSL value. It really doesn't matter. So if I go back to Figma and if I click here you see that we have our hex value. So what I can do is I can copy that and come here to the Visual Studio Code and hold shift and create my hashtag and then paste my hex value here. And that would create the color of my text to be white. And now I need to create another line break, write background color. If you don't want to use your mouse, you can use your keyboard to navigate between different properties. And as soon as you have the property selected, all you need to do is press tab. And as you can see, I'm using tab, and Visual Studio Code would generate that CSS. So if I go back to Figma, I can select my button and copy the fill value and go back to Visual Studio Code, Command V to paste that, and now I can save this. And as you can see, the sign up is the only button on my page that actually get the background color of red and a text color of white. So you know how you can give your elements in HTML a unique class attribute and style them differently. So let's just repeat that step. All we have to do is go to our login and we have to make sure to go with the opening tag, not the closing tag. So here I would go to my opening tag, and in between the less than sign and greater than sign, I would create a space and write the class. And then as you can see here, it auto selects it for me. So all I have to do is press tab to generate the class attribute with equal and quotation marks. I would just give it a class of login. So here I would go to my style tag, create a line break, add dot, and then login to select the login HTML element. And then I would just type in color tab and then hashtag triple F for the white text color. And then background, as soon as I write the word back, I have the ability to select the background dash color. So I can press tab on my keyboard and I can go back to Figma and I have my login here. Now I can select it, copy the fill value, go back to Visual Studio Code, and in between my login declaration block, I can add hashtag, Command V, save that. And right now you see I have the ability to uniquely style my HTML elements the same way I have the ability to style them in Figma. So if we visit our Visual Studio Code, we have a class of sign up, which is attached to this sign up button. We are already giving it the correct color and background color. All we need to do is to give it the correct padding size. So there is two ways in CSS for you to give your elements spacing. So we use padding to give our elements inner spacing, and we use margin to give our space outer spacing. And the way it works is, if we have a background color, we can use padding to increase the size of our button. And if we have two buttons next to each other, we can use the margin to add space between two buttons. And as you can see, the naming convention is again with dash, no spacing. So if you decide to use padding top, you have to write padding dash top, all lowercase. Same rules apply with the margin as well. So if I go back, as you can see, we have our button here. If I try to zoom in a little bit, the first button has the padding left and right of 8 and the top and bottom of right. So how do we do that in Visual Studio Code? So what we can do is write padding top 8 pixels and then also write padding bottom, and then I press return on my keyboard, and as you can see, it auto creates that for me. If I go back again to Figma, sorry, padding left and right is 8 pixels, top and bottom is 4 pixels. So here we have these as 4 pixels each. There we go. And now we need to just give it padding right side, which is 8 pixels. And if you want to duplicate, you can hold Command and D. Make sure to have your key bindings. Again, you can search for the command duplicate selection. I already explained in the previous parts of the video how you can customize your keyboard shortcuts. Mine is set to Command and D. And as you can see, I duplicated this line and I just changed the value to left, and then I have that as 8 pixels. So I'm going to save this. And as you can see, once I save this, if I take a look at the right hand side, the sign up button is, tiny bit bigger. What I can do is also in Chrome, try to zoom in a little bit so we can see the difference, because if I don't zoom in, I'm like at 300% right now. You see, because I gave it a padding of 8 pixels on right and left, we have a bit of a spacing added to left and right. However, you see the entire button is taking all the available space. And why that is the reason. If I go back to my button on Figma, you see it doesn't take all the available space. It's actually set to hug and hug. In Visual Studio Code or in general and web development, we don't have a property called hug. We don't have any of this. However, we have a property called width. Also, we have a property called height. So as you can see in CSS, we have the ability to give our HTML elements width. In this example, you see that we have lots of different values, VW, which is viewport, percentage, EM, rem. We can get into these later on, but what we care about is giving the pixel value. But if we do give our buttons a pixel value, they are going to be fixed, and we don't want that behavior. We can apply that logic if we do decide to have our button exactly the same size. Here you see, if I click on this drop down, our value is set to 89 pixel in width, and then also 43 pixels in height. And this is actually a fixed pixel value. There is no padding that has an effect. Again, if I click on the padding and I just make it 96 pixels, you see we have 0 effect on the width and height of this button. So the paddings are 0, and this button is actually being controlled using width and height properties. So here I'll just give it 100 pixels of width, and let's just give it 50 pixels of height. So for my login, the way I can control it is I can go to my login CSS declaration and I can give it the width and then press return on my keyboard and give it 100 px, which is 100 pixels. And now I can create another line break, give it a height, and give it 50 pixels of height. So I can save that. And as you can see, it actually controlled the width of my button and also the height of my button. And my button no longer goes all the available space. So it only takes the 100 pixels that I defined it, and also the 50 pixels of height that I gave it in the login class. However, what you notice is in the web development, the text is not aligned properly, even though we gave it the correct width and height. If I go back to Figma, here you see the actual text button is center aligned. We don't have that behavior when it comes to web development, so we have to give it a property called display. If I go ahead and click on my button and switch to dev mode, here you see this button. Once I click on it, if I go ahead and zoom in, here we see that we have a display called flex. And also flex has some properties which is called justify content and align items. By giving these values to my button, I'm able to center align my login text inside my container. So what I would do is I would go back again to the design mode. Now I want to introduce another property in CSS which is called display, and display has multiple values. One of the values is flex. So we were able to see that value if I go back to Figma and then try to toggle that. Here you see we have a value of flex and basically a property of display. This is exactly the same CSS properties that we use in front-end development. And the way flex item works, you can think of this dotted line as basically a flex container or a button. So if you have, again, multiple items, it really doesn't matter if you have a single text item or multiple text item. As soon as you add a display of flex to the parent container, you have the ability to align your children item on the cross axes and also the main axes. So in this example, we have our button, and as you can see, we only have one children. Here, if I click and I basically duplicate, you see I have the ability to have multiple flex children. I don't have a use case of having two text values in a button. You usually have one text value, so I'm going to delete that. But you might have an icon or something in your button, along with the text. So this is where you would use flex as well to align your icon with the text inside your flex container. So the way you initialize a flex container is by giving it the property of display. And as soon as you give it the property of display, you're able to choose a value of flex. And as you can see, the default behavior is set to align left. In this example, we have justify dash content, which is set to the default value of flex start. That basically means as soon as you have a display of flex, all your flex children item are aligned to the left. So if I go ahead and try basically adding a display of flex to my login button, as you can see, we have my login button and we already gave it a fixed height and width. All I need to do right now is to give it a display, and then I press return on my keyboard. And here you see we have a list of values to choose from. What I'm interested in is the flex, so I'm going to select display flex, and as soon as I save this, you see nothing happens. And the reason is, by default, all the flex items, which is in this example, this text children item, is aligned to the left. So if I go back to this slide, you see the default value is always set to flex start on the justify content, and it's always aligned to the left side. So how do we center align it? We use a property called justify content, as I mentioned previously, and we gave it the value of center. Justify content property only works if you actually enable flex when it comes to your children elements. So if you don't give your HTML parent element, in this example, our button, a display of flex, you're not able to use justify content. Justify content only works when you initialize display flex, and once you do that, you'd be able to align your items on the main axis using the justify content property. So now if I go back here again on the Visual Studio Code, I already gave it a display of flex, so my login is a flex item. And if I go back to Figma, here you see we have the ability to center align our item. On the right hand side, it's center aligned, and this is how we control the alignment on the Figma. So by default, it's always aligned to the left and top. This is the current behavior of the Visual Studio Code. So the way we would center align this login is in Figma by basically clicking on this icon. So here we would center align this. So if I go back to Visual Studio Code, all I need to do is just write justify content and then give it a value of center and then save this. And right now you see that my login is now center aligned on the button. So if I go back to one of our slides, here you see justify content only works on the main axis. When you have flex items, you have two axes, one which is the cross axis and the other one is the main axis. So if you decide to center align something on the cross axis, you have to use another property, and that property is align items. Again, by default, align item is set to flex start, which means your flex children element is always aligned to the top. So if you decide to center align it, all you have to do is give it align items of center, and your flex children items would be aligned to the center. So if I go back to Figma, here you see we aligned our login text to the top, and if we want to click the center alignment, now our text not only is aligned on the main axis, it's actually aligned on the cross axis too. And this happens when you combine justify content with align items. Even if I try to toggle the dev mode, click on my button, here you see on the right hand side we have justify content combined with align items. So all I have to do in Visual Studio Code right now is to go to my login and add another property which is called align items. I press return on my keyboard, give it the value of center, and then right now you see it's aligned to the top. As soon as I save this, my login is aligned to the center right now. But what you notice is if we decide to use this approach, if I have login basically with us at the moment, like something like that, and I try to save this, here you see your basically text gets wrapped. And the reason your text gets wrapped is because you gave your login item a fixed value of 100 pixel. Your button is not dynamically growing the same way it grows in Figma. This is true if I go ahead and try to copy everything. Now I navigated back to Figma. So if I switch back to the design mode and I double click and I try to paste this, you see it overflows and it doesn't act the same way as it does in the front end. The reason is your login is actually set to dynamic value. So in Figma, if you go ahead and set it to fill, as I set it to fill, you see right now my login exactly acts the same way as my front end code. So if I go back again, here you see our text is being wrapped because we're adding a width, and the children item only take the available space, they don't overflow. But what if we want our sign up to dynamically grow as we type our text values? So if I go back to my button, here you see we have again 8 pixels and 4 pixels added to left and top and bottom, which is great. And now we take a look at the property. The width is set to hug, the height is set to hug. However, we don't have these properties on the front end, but we already know we have a property called display, and also we have another value called inline flex. So if I go back and switch to dev mode, here if I click on it, right now you see that we are setting our display to inline flex, because by default in the web development world, we have certain HTML elements that take all the available space by default. So you have to override that value with the property of display. So if I go back to my Visual Studio Code, all I have to do is just give it a display, and instead of flex, here you see we have a value of flex. All I have to do is just write inline dash flex, and as soon as I select that and save this, right now you see my sign up exactly has 4 pixels of padding top and bottom and 8 pixels of padding on left and right. And not only that, if I go ahead and try to copy this text, sign up with us at the moment, and I try to save this, you see our button grows exactly the same way it does in Figma when you have the hug value. So if I go back to Figma, you see here on the width side, we have the hug value. So if I go ahead and try to double click and paste the value, you see your button grows exactly the same way dynamically. So these are the main difference between dynamically making your elements grow or giving it a fixed value, both in Figma and when it comes to your front end development. Always the recommended approach is going with this to making sure your buttons grow dynamically. However, when it comes to certain elements in your pages, usually the mobile size, you don't want your buttons to dynamically grow. So on mobile devices, you usually want your buttons to take all of the available space. So this is where you would override the width behavior and ignore the paddings that you give to your elements. Moreover, if you have to give your elements padding in all directions, you don't usually give them padding top, padding right, bottom, and left one by one. You have a way to give all of these properties, padding top, right, bottom, and left, in one single property, and that is called the padding shorthand. This goes exactly the same way for the margin. So if I go ahead and go to the next slide, right now you see we are no longer giving it padding dash top or any of the values. We're simply writing the padding property. And if we do write the padding property and just write 10 pixels, that would be applied to all the directions. So in here, you see we have all these values. If I go ahead and remove all of them and just give it a padding value and just give it, for example, 20 pixels and save this, you see 20 pixels is now being applied in all directions. So how do I apply things to the top and bottom, left and right, without actually defining each of them one by one? All I have to do is to give them a shorthand version. So if your padding only has 2 values with a space, here we have our property padding and we give it a value of 10 pixels, and then we add a space and we give it another value of 5 pixels. This would automatically tell CSS to apply 10 pixels at top and bottom and apply 5 pixels to left and right. So if I go again to Visual Studio Code, if I do decide to have 20 pixels added to top and bottom and only like 8 pixels to left and right, all I have to do is just add a space and just write 8 pixels. And if I save this, right now you see that top and bottom has 20 pixels, which is wider, and left and right has less space. So we're adding left and right padding of 8 pixels. And if I decide to individually write this, I can use the clockwise direction. Clockwise direction means if you write your first value with a space followed by your second, the way it works is your first value is always going to be the top. So in this example, we're giving it a margin. Margin and padding exactly works the same way when it comes to the clockwise direction, which means if I decide to give my padding 10 pixels and a space, that would be applied to the top. And then if I do 20 pixels as my second, that would be applied to the right side. And if I do 8 pixels as my third value, that would be applied to the bottom. And if I finally do another 5 pixels, that would be applied to the left. So there's 3 ways for you to add margin and paddings to your element. One, which is giving it one value, which is applied to all direction. The other one is giving it 2 values. The first one is applied to the top and bottom. The second one is applied to the left and right. And the other one is to apply this with 4 values, which works with top, right, and then bottom and left. Or you can simply give your elements a padding dash top or padding dash right if you want to be more explicit. So if I go back to my buttons here, if I try to add more values, now if I go ahead and add 60 pixels and also, for example, 12 pixels. Right now 20 pixels is applied to the top side, 8 pixels is applied to the right, and now you see 60 pixels is applied to the bottom. So what you notice is as soon as I save this sign up button is going to have a 60 pixels of padding at the bottom and then 12 pixels of padding to the left. So if I save this, right now this is the padding that I gave to my button. Usually you don't want that kind of behavior. I just wanted to showcase there is a shorthand way for you to write your paddings. Simply, if you decide to have a shorthand, you can do that. If I go back to Figma, if I click on my element, I have 8 left and right, 4 top and bottom. So what I can do is simply write 8 pixels, which is top, and then 8 pixels, which is bottom, and then finally 4 pixels left, 4 pixels right. Again, it would be top, right, bottom, and left. If I save this, now my button is back to its normal shape. Also, if you have a repeated behavior, which means you have 8 pixels top and bottom with the same value and left and right with the same value, you can simply omit all of this and only have 2 values, which means 8 pixels would be applied to the top and bottom and 4 pixels would be applied to the left and right. So if I save this, nothing will happen. It's exactly going to have the same result. Now we know how we can dynamically make our buttons grow, or we can override this behavior and making them wrap to the next line. Classes allow us to separately select HTML elements and give them certain CSS styles. Not only that, if we use a class in CSS, we can actually reuse it across our HTML file. For example, we have this sign up. So if I go ahead and let me just remove the text here and I duplicate this. If I go ahead and save this, here we see that we have sign up, and again sign up. And if I just simply change the text to cancel, for example, and save this, you see that we are reusing our CSS style across HTML. The way we do that in Figma is by creating a component. So if you decide to create components and you want to reuse them, you simply would click on your button. In this example, we have this button. Let me just remove all the extra text. We have this sign up button. And if we go ahead and click on that tiny icon on the top right, which is create component, able to create a component out of the Figma auto layout frame. Now, since I created the component, I can hold Option on my keyboard, drag it out, and also let me just drag it out multiple times, hold Command and D to duplicate that. If I simply change the text on any of them, for example, cancel, buy, delay, for example, and if I click outside, here we have 4 buttons and we have a master component. So if I go ahead and change this color to a purple color, let's go with 210 or maybe 270, there we go. Now you see the buttons that I have on my project actually gets the same values. So this exactly works the same way in CSS. So all I have to do is, instead of actually renaming my component to button, for example, I would just give this primary dash button. And this one, the reason I'm giving it all lowercase with no spacing, because I do want to reuse this name as my CSS class. Also, I'm going to delete the other button, so we just focus on one button for now. Also in Figma, as soon as you create a component, if you take a look at it, it has this diamond shape, which is 4 different square rotated. And if you use another instance of that master component, again, this is called instance in Figma, it has the same diamond shape, but it is hollowed, so it's empty. That means this is an instance. And in Figma, if you have the master component, it is actually shown as 4 squares. Since we renamed this to primary dash button, I'm going to double click to copy that. Now I visit HTML. So all I need to do is basically remove the login. We no longer need that. Also, we no longer need that. Also, I'm going to duplicate this another time. For example, call this buy and cancel and save this. So we have 4 different buttons and the name is sign up. So all I have to do is basically rename all of them one by one. In Visual Studio Code, if you have multiple items that you want to rename, you can hold Command Shift and A. This way you can select the next available match. This is a shortcut that I customized on my own. So if I click outside, if you don't have this shortcut set up, all you have to do is bring the quick action and search for the keyword selection. And as you can see, the command that I'm using is called add selection to next find match. And I customize it to Shift Command and A. Again, you can click on that and you can customize it to your keyboard shortcut. But for now, I have this as Shift Command and A. So if I go ahead and highlight that sign up, it's going to highlight the matching selections for me. So I would hold Command Shift and A and then repeat that multiple times. Now if I go ahead and delete that, I can actually rename this to primary button, but I already copied that to my clipboard, so I Command V that, and now I pasted primary dash button as my class. So if I go ahead and save that, click outside, save that, you see on the right hand side it actually removed all the styling for me, even though I renamed it to primary dash button. And the reason is we also have to rename our class to primary dash button. So here, this is our master class, so I'm going to remove that, paste primary dash button, and then save that, and now I have exactly linked my buttons to my class. Also, if I go back to Figma, for example, if I decide to click and add border radius, in Figma you would add corners by basically going to appearance. Here you see we have this appearance, and I can individually add them corners by clicking on that. However, I do want to give them all individual corners, so here I would just go ahead and select 8 pixels, and I do want to make the paddings a bit larger, so here on the left and right side I would give them 16, top and bottom I would give them 8, so I kind of double the amount of padding size. Also, I need to copy the hex value here, so I selected this purple, so I need to copy that and also update the padding and update the border radius. So if I navigate back to Visual Studio Code, the first thing that I need to do is to click on my background color, since we already know about that, add the new purple value, save this. Now, as you can see, as soon as I update one single value, all the buttons on my HTML that has the primary dash button class would get the update. Also, for my padding, I already covered padding in my previous videos. In this example, we are using a shorthand for the padding, which is 8 pixels for top and bottom and 4 pixels for left and right. So I'm going to basically update the value to 16 pixels on left and right and 8 pixels on top and bottom, because I have that auto layout created. As you can see, 16 pixels of padding is added to left and right, and 8 pixel is added to top and bottom. So here I would just need to write 16 pixels and 8 pixels, but you have to pay attention is as soon as you add the first value, this would be added to the top and bottom. So I don't want that. So I want to make sure that the 16 pixel is added to the left and right. So I have to bring the 8 pixels in the beginning to make sure that 8 pixel is added to the top and bottom and 16 is added to the left and right. If I go ahead and save this, now you see that my sign up buttons have different padding. Not only that, I also need to make them individually rounded. And the property that we use to round corners on CSS side is called border dash radius. Again, border dash radius allows us to individually round corners. The same way we add one value in padding and margin, if we do add one value to our border radius, that would be applied in all directions. We can also explicitly add border radius by writing border dash top dash left dash radius. And as you can see, if you want to follow this, it's a bit lengthy. So you have to type a lot of properties to actually get what you want if you do want to individually round them. However, you can also use a shorthand way. If you decide to add border radius to the top left, you can just simply add the first value and it would be added to the top left. Same thing, if you add your second value, it would be added to the top right. Your third value would be added to the bottom right, and your last value would be added to the bottom left. This exactly is true in Figma. So if I go ahead and click and try to drag that outside by holding Alt or Option in Mac, and if I try to click on that, you see individually it starts with top left. Here you see my top left is being rounded, and now I have the top right and then bottom right and then bottom left. So this is how you would individually round corners in Figma, and this is how you would individually round corners in CSS by adding 4 values or individually declaring them one by one. Or if you have one single value, you can simply add that as one value and it would automatically get applied to all directions. So all I need to do is come to Visual Studio Code, write border dash radius, and then again if I press return on my keyboard, it automatically generates that for me, and then I would add 8 pixels and save that. And as you can see, as soon as I add that one line, all my buttons would get that update. So in Figma you might have a secondary button, and if you, for example, want to have your sign up to be this solid color and you want to have your cancel to have a border with a different color, we have another property. So if I go back to Figma, here we have our primary button, and the way we add a different variation is by basically clicking on the master component, holding Option or Alt to duplicate that, and then basically bringing the quick action, and detaching it here using detach instance. As soon as we detach this instance, we can create a separate component out of this, again by clicking on that component icon up top, or you can always bring the quick action by clicking on command/. Again, always command/ is your best friend. So here I can search for create component, and as you can see, it is grayed out because I need to select my button and then search for create component. And as soon as I do that and I create my component, now I have two components added. So what I can do is I can highlight both of them, and then as soon as I highlight them, you see on the top side we have an option called combine as variants. So I can go ahead and click on that, and right now you see my component is actually being dotted. So now I have two components that is grouped by something called primary dash buttons. Also, if I basically click outside, command Z that, command Z multiple times and delete that, you can always click on the master component, and also you have the ability to click on that tiny icon. This allows you to add a new variant. So if I go ahead and do that, it automatically creates another variant for me. So right now I have primary dash button, and then here I have two components that are grouped under one master component. So this group is called variants in Figma. So what we need to do is break that down to CSS classes. So on the Figma side, if I click on that one, so what I would do is I would just give this a generic name, for example, button. And what I need to do on my property side, here Figma give this a default property, property 1. So all I need to do is click here, double click, just write CSS class, there we go. And by doing that, I am defining a custom property called CSS class. And now I can click on my first one, which is sign up. And then instead of having this as default value, I could write primary dash button. And then I can go to my second button. Let's go ahead and change the color. In this example, I need to copy the fill value, go to the stroke, and then paste that. There we go. And then change that to, for example, white. There we go. Also, I do want to change the text. So on my second variant, I want to click on that and also change that to the purple color. There we go. Or maybe you don't want that. You want to have your second button with no fill background. So you can always do that. And that can be your second button as your secondary. Also, you have the ability to make them a bit lighter. So if I go back and add the fill, which is the background color of my secondary button, I can go here, paste the value, click on my basically fill icon, and I have to make sure I basically navigated from hex to HSL. We haven't got into HSL, but what HSL allows us to do is to reduce the lightness and saturation to create a different color from the same family. So all I have to do is select the third one. Again, if I hover over it, you see Figma tells me that is a lightness value, and I would just bump it to 90. And then I can also basically go over my saturation, maybe reduce that to 80 if you do want to, or you can keep it as 100. And by doing that, you see Figma generates the hex value for me. So what I can do is I can basically use this hex value on my front end in VS Code and change the classes. So the last thing I need to do is to update my property in my button variant. So if I click on my button variant and I select my second one, here you see my first one is being set to primary dash button. All I need to do is to update my second one. So I would just go ahead and rename this to secondary dash button. There we go. So now if I go ahead and click on the cancel one on the top side, on the variant section, I have the ability to swap between CSS classes. So here I have a primary button. Now I can click on my secondary button and you see my class is being applied here. Behind the scene, this is not how Figma works. But if you do rename your properties based on a CSS class, and if you collaborate with the developers, they would know to choose what class on the front end. So if you again rename your properties as CSS class, now this is more organized. If a developer visits this file and takes a look at the properties and notice that we have a property called CSS class, which is set to secondary button, and all we have to do is to update that on the Visual Studio Code. So all I need to do is grab this fill value, go to Visual Studio Code, and right now we have primary dash button. So all I need to do is create another class. Again, starts with a dot, and now I would just write secondary dash button, and then open and close the curly brace. And the only thing that I need to change is background color. So I would press tab on my keyboard and then hold hashtag and then paste the background color value that I have copied from Figma. Also, I use the same hex value here on the Figma side for my color. So I would just basically copy that and then write color. And then I would just give it again another hex value, save that. Also, I need to exactly have the same display property with the padding size and border radius. So all I need to do is copy the same values to my secondary button, paste them. And one last thing that I need to do is to add the border. So in Figma, we can add border using stroke, but in CSS, we have a property called border. And the way it works is you can either write it as a shorthand version, which is border. You have to pass 3 values. Or you can explicitly define them using border dash width or dash style and dash color. And this would apply to all directions for your button. I usually go with the shorthand version. So I would just write border. The first value is going to be the border width. So I would give it 1 pixel because I have it as 1 pixel in Figma. The second one is how you want your border to be, which is a solid line. And lastly, the color of your border. So if I navigate back to Figma, here you see we have our secondary button. If I scroll down, we have 1 pixel of stroke. You can think of it as border, which is applied in all direction. And this is the hex color. So if I basically visit Visual Studio Code, all I need to do is create another line break and just write border, press return on my keyboard, give it 1 pixel, add a space, give it the keyword of solid and add a space. And then finally copy the hex value here. There we go. I copy it to my clipboard and I paste it. And that's it. I'm all done with my secondary button. And the last thing for me to do is to update my HTML. Instead of having primary dash button, I would just double click and then write secondary dash button. As soon as I save that, right now you see my secondary button is changed. So in Figma, you basically would click on your variant, or in this example, we have our instance, and you have the ability to switch between primary and secondary. In the front end, what we do is we give our elements a class, and then we basically choose our classes this way. So in CSS, if you decide to use fonts, you have to always have a fallback. In this example, we are telling CSS that make sure to use the Google font that I selected and I embedded to my project. In this example is enter. And then I do add a comma. That means I'm separating that value, and I tell the browser that if you don't find this font in my project, and if the user on the other end who's viewing my project doesn't have this font, make sure to use any sans serif font that is similar to enter. You can also declare your fonts like that, font-family sans serif with no quotation mark, because sans serif is a value that is preserved and it's a keyword. Same thing as the font family, which is a keyword in CSS properties. So if I go ahead and only just write that, it is going to work. However, I need to add this value to link to my font and then use comma and the keyword sans serif as a fallback. And then as you can see in CSS, we use comma again to group our CSS selectors. So the way it works is we would select our first HTML element and we follow it by a comma. And then whatever comes after that would be grouped with the first HTML element. That means all the properties and values that you group will be applied to both elements. Again, in this example, we are grouping 3 elements here. In our example, we only have primary button and secondary button, so we're only grouping 2. But the key character that we need to use is the comma to be able to group our elements. So if I navigate back to Visual Studio Code, I have to now look at the properties that are being used in both primary button and the secondary button that is similar. In this example, we have a font family. And then as you can see, if you hover over certain characters in Visual Studio Code tries its best to find the next match. And as you can see, it actually highlights the other match that it finds. So what I can now do is group primary button and secondary button in another style and cut that from both of them and add it to my group CSS selectors. So right now I would just go ahead and copy the primary button. So I'll just create line breaks. I have my, again, primary button. Now I add the key character, which is a comma. And now I would go ahead and copy my secondary button. And now I would paste this and I would add my curly braces, open a new line, and I know that the font family is the one that is being repeated. So I would cut that from one of them and then go ahead and delete that from the other one and click inside the declaration block and I would paste this. And then as soon as I save this, Visual Studio Code reformats this for me. But right now you see the result is exactly identical. What we did on our end is we grouped our CSS classes. The other common elements between them is the border radius. And as you can see, if I try to hover over it, Visual Studio Code selects the other match for me. So I would just cut that, Command and X, basically paste that here, and I will have to make sure to delete that from the secondary button. And then as you can see, the padding and the display is exactly identical. So what I would do is cut that as well, paste this here, and I would basically remove that from the other one. And if I go ahead and save this, right now it's so much easier for me to reuse my style. Which means if I have to now change the padding for both of my buttons, I don't need to go to my primary button and change this and also go ahead and update that in my secondary button. Since I grouped these two, if I decide to, for example, use 40 pixels, I just do 40 pixels. And then if I save this, all of my buttons, regardless of their classes, whether they're primary or secondary, will get the update. So if I go ahead and save this, right now you see all my buttons got the update. And again, down the line, you might have ghost button which has a different colors, or a text button, and all you have to do is basically add comma and group the similar styles that are applied in all of them, and also individually select them to give them the unique values. And as you can see, I didn't apply the color when I was grouping them, because if I do add the color when I'm grouping them, all of these would get the update, and I don't want that. I want to make sure that the color and the background color is unique, and only these four properties are similar in between them. So I would go ahead and Command Z that and save this. And then as you can see, all of these get the update instantly. Step 12. So we have to create the navigation bar. If we go ahead and switch to Figma Dev mode, here on the left hand side, we see the website. And then if I click on the navigation, and if I try to zoom in, we see that the navigation consists of link, which is a component. And if I click on the link on the right hand side here, we see our component, so we can open it in the playground. And then as you can see, we have the ability to switch between different variants, and we can click on this tiny icon for us to go back to the main component. So now we're brought back to the main component, and the first step in our website journey is to create these link components. So let's just go ahead and click on one of them. And if I go ahead and scroll down here, we see the CSS. However, I don't want to use the rem value, so what I can do is go ahead and switch to pixels, and I'm happy with basically the pixel values. But what I do notice is we have again some styles created. So before we go ahead and recreate this, we need to export the styles into CSS variables, and the plugin that I'm going to use for that is called CSS Gen. So this plugin allows us to export our styles into CSS. I would click on that, I would select CSS, and then for the colors I would go with hex. I'll leave the default as kebab case. I really don't care about the root colors, and I don't want to have any prefixes. So what I would do is click generate to see the CSS variables generated for me, and then here I see the box shadow as well generated. So what I would do is copy this, I would navigate to VS Code, I would open my file explorer, and then here you see I have nothing. So the first thing I need to do is create a file called index.html, and then hold shift and exclamation, and then press tab to generate the HTML boilerplate. And then for this one, we would just rename this to Notion pricing. So what I need to do is go ahead and create a CSS file called style.css, and then Command and V to paste it. Also, what I need to do is basically cut this value and delete this class, and let's just go ahead and create a box shadow. So we're going to rename this to shadow1, and then Command and V to paste the value here. So I would save the CSS file, and as you can see, our style.css is created. However, it's not linked to the HTML. So what we need to do is basically go on the head tag, and let's open another line and add the link HTML tag. And then here, as soon as I click that, it generates that link tag for me. And what I need to do is link my CSS to my HTML file. So I would start with dot and then /. That means start with the same directory. And then here you see the VS Code pops up the CSS for me. So I'm going to select that. And now I'm happy with linking my CSS style to my index HTML. Now let's just go ahead and create the link component. For the link component, if we scroll down, here we see that the CSS is being generated for us. So what I can do is copy this and visit my CSS style. And then here at the bottom, create a class called link-black. The reason we renamed this to link-black, if I go ahead and navigate to the Figma file, here we see we have the link component. So we use the name of the link, and then we add a dash. And then here, if I click on the one, which is the black link, here on the right hand side, we have a property called theme, and the value is set to black. That's why we rename our CSS class into link-black. Same thing, we have again link off white, as well as if I click the last one, link white. So the first one, which is the black, we are going to copy the values and the style. Since I do that, I'm going to Command and V to paste the values. However, what you notice is we have the link black, white, and off-white with all similar values. So what I need to do first is create a link class, which is a default one. And let's just go ahead and copy all these values here to the link one. This way we are reusing the link and we combine it with the link black. And for the black one, we don't need all of this. We would visit the Figma dev mode and copy the styles here. And then we would just replace everything and Command and V and paste it. Also, what we notice is here Figma grouped the border radius under the link dash black. Because all of our link have consistent radius padding, we would move that to the top and we group it under link. Also, we no longer need any gap because our links don't have any icons in them. And finally, what I need to do is copy this 2 times, rename this to white, and rename this the other one to off-white. Navigate to the Figma dev mode, select the off-white, and go ahead and copy the background color. Replace the link off-white background color in the CSS. And then finally, we would grab the white link color and we would replace the CSS here as well. Basically, we generated our design tokens. If you have an HTML file and CSS file, you make sure to reset everything before you even get started. So at the top of the page, we go ahead and reset everything by selecting star and then opening a curly brace. We want to make sure that all the margins are 0, all the paddings are as well 0. And then finally, we have to make sure we select box sizing as border box. If we navigate to the Figma dev mode here, if you select any of them, and then if you scroll down here, we have again box model, which consists of padding, margin, and border. And then here you see we have set this to border box. So Figma by default is setting box sizing as border box. So when we try to build our websites, we have to make sure we also set everything using the star selection to box sizing as border box. So let's just go ahead and open index.html. And within the body, let's just create a div and then just write link. And then here, what we need to do is basically create a class and give it the values that we created. Here on the style, if I scroll down, we have link and then we have link dash black. So we have to combine these 2 classes as a combo class and add it to our index.html. In this example, we have a div tag. So here in the class, we would just write link and then we would write link dash black. And what we need to do is duplicate that 2 times, rename this to white, and rename the other one to off-white. And what you notice is this link is being repeated on all of them because this link carries the padding and the border radius. So we have to repeat that in all of them. So if we open our index.html file in the live server, you see 3 of our links are created. But what you notice is the font as well as the color of the text is a bit off. So if I navigate back to Figma dev mode and if I click on the link here, you see we have the text. And then on the right hand side here, we have the typography values. What I noticed is all of them are exactly the same in terms of the font family. So what I need to do is add the font family globally to the entire project. And then here you see we are using a Google font, which is Enter. So what I need to do is visit Google Fonts and search for the font name that I use in Figma, which is Enter. Click on this and then click on Get Font. And then here what we need is Get Embedded Code. And Google already tells us that you need to include this in the HTML head tag. So I'm going to copy the code, visit my HTML file, and then right underneath the meta, I would create another line and paste. And then as you can see, we have added our Google font, which is Enter, to our HTML project. We have to add one more thing to our project, which is the font family. In this example, all I need to do is grab that, which is font-family, Enter. Also, if I go ahead and navigate to the typography, on the Figma dev mode, here we see we have font-family, Enter. We're basically using the same value on our project that is being used in the Figma dev mode. And in order for us to enable this for the entire project, instead of adding this one by one to every single CSS class, we can select the parent of the parent. In this example, we have the HTML, which is the parent of everything. And then we have the body, which is the parent of the content. So we go ahead and select the style.css and then navigate to the top and group HTML tag with the body tag using comma and Command and V and paste the font family here. If you take a look at the left hand side here, you see the font is a bit off. However, as soon as I add that to the main parent element and save this, you see the font family is changed. This is called inheritance, which means if you add something to the parent, the children element, in this example the div links, inherit the styles. And then finally, all I need to do is fix the colors of the link. Step 8. If I navigate to the Figma dev mode, here we have the link, and if I double click to the text, we have color, which is gray 100. So what I would do is copy everything, navigate back to the CSS style, and then I would scroll down, and I have to make sure I add this to the group because we have similar font sizes across our links. So here I would go ahead and add everything here. And I would remove the properties that is unique to each variant. So in this example, we don't want all the links to have a white color. So I would cut that and I would add that only to the blank dash black. So here I would just paste that here. Also, we don't need to repeat font dash family, because if you go to the top here, we are repeating font dash family for HTML and body, so they would inherit already this CSS property. So I'll just go ahead and delete that. We do want this to be 12 pixels and the font weight to be 400. And for the font style and line height, because these are generic values, we can group them and then cut them and move them all the way to the HTML body tags at the top. So if I go ahead and save everything, now if you take a look at the left hand side, our links are updated with the correct colors. And then finally, we need to update the link colors for our white and off-white. So if I navigate to the Figma dev mode, double click on the text, here you see we have color primary 5. So I would just go ahead and copy that. And then if I go ahead and scroll down, I would hold Option and click create a new line, Command and V, and paste the value here. As soon as I save that, nothing changes because this color is very close to the black, so you can't tell the difference. But the good thing is this color is linked to the primary 5, which is our CSS variable. This way, by linking it, if down the line you decide to change this, all you have to do is visit the primary dash 5 and change the color here. Also, when it comes to HTML, we can't simply add div tags. If you want to link HTML pages to one another, we have to use anchor tag. An anchor tag is written with A, and the attribute that is very important in anchor tag is the href attribute. In this example, we are linking to our website, baruji.com, and in between that, you can add the HTML text element. So if we navigate to Figma, here you see that we have all these links which take users to every single HTML page. So what we need to do is convert all these links in the HTML from div to a tag. So if I navigate back to VS Code, here we see that we have div. So all I have to do is simply replace all these with a tag, and Visual Studio Code already replaces the end for me. And another attribute that I need to add is href. So here I would just add href to all of them. And for now, I will just leave it as a dummy hashtag. Basically, a dummy hashtag means it doesn't go anywhere. But if you decide to have multiple pages in HTML, this is how you would build them. Also, if I want to build this, I need to rename these. So let's just go ahead and rename them to product, teams, individuals, download, and pricing. Select all the individual text, command / and search for ManyPaster. And again, ManyPaster is a plugin, so you have to make sure to first view the detail and run it if it doesn't appear on your end. As soon as this plugin appears, what I can do is highlight all the text, copy from my selection, and then as you can see, it's added to my ManyPaster. So what I can do is highlight them, Command and C to copy it, navigate back to VS Code, and here in between the anchor tag, I can paste them. So I would fast forward and update the rest of the links. And as you can see, I have added the text values to all of the anchor tags. However, if we take a look at the left side, here you see the anchor tags have an underline. This underline is a default behavior of the browser. So we have to make sure we reset all the anchor tags so it exactly looks identical to our Figma file. So in CSS, we would go ahead and add the anchor tag right before the links, select all the anchor tags, and making sure to use pseudo class. And in this example, we would hold colon and then have the pseudo class link added. Again, the link pseudo class is specifically for all the anchor tags, and the way we would group them is we add again we have another pseudo class called visited, another pseudo class called hover, and then finally another pseudo class called active. So these are all the pseudo classes we need to group together for the link, and make sure we reset all of them back to no text underline. And the way we would remove that is called text decoration in CSS, and we would basically add none. And then if we go ahead and save that, here we're basically saying make sure to select all the anchor tags using the pseudo classes of link, visited, hover, and active, and remove the underline from all of them. Also, if I go ahead and visit Figma, here you see all of these are selected as off-white. If I again go ahead and visit dev mode, here we see that the CSS is off-white, and if I go ahead and visit all the way to the end, we have these 3 links. All of these are off-white except get Notion for free, which is the black. So what I need to do is use ManyPaster to copy these values at the end by holding command and selecting the text, copy it, and then add it to the clipboard. And finally, we would visit the HTML, and here what we need to do is basically duplicate that 3 more times and start adding the text. So I'm going to fast forward, and what you notice is the links are all added. We will fix layout and spacing later on, but what we need to do is basically have everything as off-white except get Notion for free. So here, instead of having the product as black, we would replace this with off-white, and also the other one, we replace that with off-white, and finally get Notion for free, we replace the class with black. And if I go ahead and save that, Here you see we have all the links added correctly using anchor tag, and we have get Notion for free as our only black link. Now we can go ahead and target the navigation bar. If I go ahead and click on the nav, here we see that on the left hand side we are breaking the nav into two divs, one which is logo plus the left, and also the other one which is right. So what we can do is first target the logo plus the left, and then here we see on the Figma side the CSS snippet is set to flex with a gap of 16. So what we can do is copy that, and then here we have to first create a nav tag, and then the nav tag would basically group all of these for us. However, the first group we need to do is basically product all the way to pricing. So what we can do is basically create another div and give it a class of the navigation, logo, and links all are grouped under this div tag. So what we need to do is go to the style. We need to use the comments in Visual Studio Code. Again, my comment shortcut is different than yours. Make sure to always go to the shortcuts. And then if you visit shortcuts, you can search for the comment and then type in comment block. And then what you notice is my comment block toggle, the comment block is set to Shift Command and P. So here we add a comment and we write nav. Basically that shows that everything that comes after the nav would actually be considered the navigation style. So here we can add some dashes. It really doesn't matter. That will help us basically separate our styles. And then right underneath, we need to make sure to select nav logo links. So here we go ahead and select nav logo links, and then we would go ahead and Command and V to paste the CSS styles that we have. We no longer need the flex start because the flex start is a default value, so we are going to omit that. And if I go ahead and save this, I also need to make sure to go to the HTML, grab all the links, cut them, paste them under the nav links, and also grab all of this, which is again the nav logo links, cut that and paste that under the nav. So here, if we break it down, we have nav, and inside nav we have a div which is called nav logo links, and inside that we have the links. So if I go ahead and visit Figma, here we see we have logo and left. If I go ahead and open that, you see here we have the left tag, which means not only we have to group the logo, we have another div tag inside to group the links, and is also set to flex with a gap of 8. So what I need to do is first copy the image. So in Figma you can right click on the image, and then here you see copy as PNG, and in Visual Studio Code I can go ahead, open a new folder, call this IMG, and then click and Command and V. As soon as I Command and V that, you see the image is pasted for me here. So what I can do is rename this to logo-notion. And all I need to do is go back here, inside the nav logo links, add an image tag, and then link to the images logo-notion. So here, /images logo notion.png, and then here for the alt tag we just write logo notion. If we go ahead and visit this in the browser, we see that we have the Notion logo added. We have our links here, product, teams, individual, download, and pricing. However, the spacing between these are off and the links are all stretched, and we don't want that behavior. Also, the request demo and get Notion for free, the sizing is correct but the placement is off, so we have to also fix that. So if we take a look at Figma, here if I click on my logo, here you see that it is set to the fixed width of 105 and 30. So here I would copy that and then visit my CSS. Here we have nav logo links and we have an image. So here under my style, we have nav logo links, and inside of that we would target our image and open another curly brace. In CSS you can actually nest curly braces. This basically means you are selecting everything inside nav logo links and you're going one level nested, which is images, and then here I would Command and V and paste the width and height here. Also, in order for us to fix the width issue, we can now visit Figma and click on logo plus left, and then here you see we have flex start. So if we add this back, we will be able to fix the stretch link behavior of the issue. However, we don't want it to align to the start. We can use exactly the same property but align it in the center, which means here we have nav logo links. Instead of links, let's just rename this to nav logo and then left, and then also update that here, nav logo left, because exactly this is the name that we have on the Figma side. And then here for the nav logo left, we would just add another property called align items and then align it to the center, and then we would basically save both of the files. And then also for the links here, we would add another div tag, add a class, and then for the class one we would just write nav left, and then the nav left would basically wrap everything here, which is all the way from product to pricing. So we would cut that, paste that under the nav left. So if we collapse everything, let's just go ahead and see how our HTML looks like. So we have our body, and then inside that we have a nav, and then as you can see we have nav logo left, and if we open it we have our logo. And then also if we have the navigation, you can see that we have the nav left as well. So all we need to do is basically visit Figma, and then in Figma you see if I click on my left, we have exactly the same properties. The only difference is the gap is 8. So what I would do is copy that, go back to my CSS style, and then here instead of actually targeting image, I would go ahead and target nav and dash left. And then this way I'm saying make sure to visit nav logo left and make sure to select nav left, and then for that one I would command and V and paste flex, and then instead of flex start I would change it to center. What you notice is we are repeating some of the properties here, so we can refactor this a little bit better. And nav left are all using flex and center. We can actually group them. So the way we would do that is we would basically copy the nav logo left. Let's just go ahead and create nav logo left at the top, add a comma, and then also select nav left. Right after that, open the curly brace, and then we would basically cut the display flex and then align item center, and then we would add this here. So this way we are grouping the nav left and nav logo left. And then here what we need to do is remove the repeated CSS properties and save this. Also we have to make sure to add the class name, which is the dot. And if we take a look at this, basically we are grouping the repeated CSS properties, which are display flex and align item center. And then for the unique values, we are giving them their own values here, which is gap 16 and 8. This way our CSS is cleaner and we are trying our best to follow best practices. So right now if we take a look at our website, here we see that we have fixed all of these with the correct spacing, and we have our Notion logo all fixed. The only two things that we need to fix is the right side as well as the gap around the navigation. Again, if we visit Figma, if we click on the navigation and then if we scroll down here, we see that Figma already gave it some CSS values. So what we need to do is copy that and then add these values to the parent nav. So let's just go ahead and visit the CSS style, and then on top, nav is an HTML tag, so we no longer need to add a dot behind because we are not targeting the class. So here we would target the nav, command and V to paste that. And also for the width, we no longer need to have a fixed value. We want the width to grow, so we would turn that into 100% width. Also for the padding, we keep it at 10 pixels. And for the align items, we would change it to the center. And justify content space between basically pushes the elements all the way to the edge. So we're happy with this and we would save this. And then finally, we need to cut all of these, create another div tag and rename this to right. Here we would call this nav-right. And then if you write your elements like that with a dot and press tab, Visual Studio Code creates the div tag for you with the class. So here we have created the nav left. So what we need to do is create the nav right. So here we would paste the links inside the nav right. However, what you have to pay attention is the nav right is no longer in the same parent level, which means the nav left is nested inside nav logo left, and the nav right is going to be placed next to the nav logo left, so here. So we should not place this inside the nav logo left. So that is a big difference. And the reason is, if you visit Figma, here you see we have the navigation and then we have the nav logo left. So both of them are siblings. They are not children of nav logo left. So we have to make sure not to place the right inside the nav logo left. They have to be in the same level and their parent is nav. However, inside the logo plus left, we have the logo and we also have the left. And this is how we break down Figma auto layout and translate it to HTML. So once we're happy with this, again, we have the nav logo left, we have the nav left, which has a bunch of links inside of it. And also we have the nav right, which has a bunch of links inside of that. And then also we made sure we target all of these with the CSS that is generated from Figma. We made some tweaks. And after saving all of this, we can take a look at the result. And then as you can see, this is the HTML CSS result. What you notice is the spacing here is a bit off. So what we can do is we can group these two because they are having the same values, which means is if I go back to my index.html, here we have nav right and nav left. So what I have to do is copy the nav right, go to my CSS and group them under nav left and nav logo left. So this way, all of them would have display flex and center. And then I have to target my nav right and give it 8 pixels of gap. However, I cannot nest this inside nav logo left because they are not in the same parent level. So I have to basically select the nav right outside and give it 8 pixels of gap. And I have to make sure to remove that dot. And since we're repeating this, what I can do is basically copy the nav left as well, delete all of that, and also group that with nav right. And then also we can cut that and place the groups at the top and then save this. So we are cleaning up everything and grouping them to have a better CSS styling. And now if I take a look at my HTML CSS result, we successfully managed to translate our Figma navigation component into HTML CSS component. Step 13. So far we managed to create the navigation bar, and in the navigation bar we had again the links. The links and navigation are created. Now we move to the other section, which is the hero section. If I click on my website here, you see that from the navigation we have 48 pixels of space between the navigation and the hero section. As well, if I click on the section in the Figma dev mode, we have a 24 pixels of gap between our main header and also our chip design, which is now with no shape. So what I can do is first click on the navigation bar and add basically a 48 pixels of margin bottom. So what we need to do is basically target the navigation bar that we have and just give it a margin bottom of 48 pixels. So here all I need to do is basically search for the nav tag. Here I have the nav tag, which is display flex. All I need to do is just add margin bottom 48 pixels. So that is the first step. What we need to do is recreate the chip component. In the chip, if I click on the main component, here we see we have two different variations, and then here inside the main component I can scroll down and I see again all the CSS properties that this main chip has. So what I would do is I would copy this and I would go ahead and add the chip like before the link. So here I'm gonna add a comment and just write chip, and then as you can see here between the chip and navigation I'll add my CSS code and I need to give it a class. So if I scroll up here, you see we have link and also we have link dash black. This means basically we have a common link styles and we are repeating it for link black, white and off-white. So in future if you decide to have the blue version, we can have the same approach. So we would first write chip, which is the main chip component, Command and B to paste these styles. Again, I no longer need the gap because we have no icons inside our chip. And if I go back to Figma, here I see the style. So what I would do is I would copy that, which is unique to my chip, and I would scroll up. Here I see that it is purple, which is set to true. So what I can do is make it chip dash purple, and then for the other one make it chip dash blue. Even though the variant is set to purple, which is false or true, in CSS we don't have this ability to set false or true, so we have to give it a CSS class name that is as close as possible to this chip. So let's just go ahead here, under the chip we would just write chip dash purple and then create that. Command and B to paste this, and what you notice is the border radius is common between the blue and purple chip, so we would move that to the top. And all I have to do is basically copy this chip purple, repeat it, and then replace this with the blue, and also update the text color and the background color for blue and purple chip. So if I navigate back to the Figma dev mode here for the blue one, I would scroll down. Here I have background color tertiary, so I'm going to copy that, and then I would navigate to my blue chip. Here I would remove everything and replace this with tertiary 40. Also what I need to do is basically double click and select the text. I need to copy all of this. However, what we notice is some of these styles are all being repeated, so I don't need to have every single style added. So what I would do is I would copy that, visit my chip. Here I notice that if I scroll up, previously we had the link and we set it again to font size of 12 and weight of 400. However, we didn't add the font family, so if I scroll up all the way, we added the font family to the HTML in the body, so we no longer need to repeat that. So what I need to do is basically scroll down and only add the values that are unique to the chip. So here I would Command and V and paste that. So I know I no longer need to add the line height, font style and the font family, so I'm going to remove all of this and I would only keep font size and font weight, which is unique to this chip. Also this color doesn't belong here, so I need to cut that and add it to the purple. So I'm going to save this and go back to the Figma dev mode. So in Figma dev mode, all I have to do is again double click on the blue one and here copy the color and then scroll down and then just add the text color for the blue chip. If I navigate to the live browser, here you see we already have all the links created, so we can test it. Since we already have the chip, let's for example change the pricing and download to different chip colors to see whether our CSS styling works. So what I would do is I would go here to the index HTML. Here on the pricing, instead of having link off white, I would replace that again with chip and also chip dash purple. Also I would delete the link because I no longer want the link. Also I would copy that and replace the download as well with chip and chip blue. So if I save this and view this in the browser, right now we managed to create 2 additional design token, and as you can see our download and pricing exactly have the identical look and feel that we have on the Figma side. So I'm going to revert the changes, so we are back to our original link design. So here I would just Command and Z multiple times, so we are basically back to link and link off white. So since we managed to recreate the chip component using HTML and CSS, all we have to do is visit the website and now replace this with Notion AI. And also if I take a look at the section, here you see we have 24 pixels of gap, and then on the left hand side, let's just close the pages. And if we take a look at the section here, again, we only have one chip, and then we have the text. So first we need to create the section, and then the section, again, if we take a look at the right side, we have flex and column, and the gap is 24 pixel. So in this example, we do need the gap because we want to have a gap of 24 pixels section. So what I would do is first copy that, visit our HTML, and here I would create another section, give it a class of hero. So in this example, I would just type hero. If you type your HTML element like that, section.hero, and if you press tab, it would actually create a section and it would give it a class of hero. So here in HTML, I can also add a comment and then just write hero section, and then here all I have to do is basically navigate to my CSS styles, and hero section comes after nav. So what I need to do is create another comment and then just type in hero, and right underneath I would just type in hero and then Command and V and paste the styles. You don't need align self stretch, so what I would do is I would remove that and it would keep everything here. So if I go ahead and save this, nothing would happen because the hero section is empty. However, what I need to do is basically create that chip. So here I would just give it a class of chip, and if you notice we are using the purple one, so I need to give it chip-purple and press tab, and you see right now VS Code created the chip and chip purple class. And if I go ahead and visit Figma dev mode, here you see we have Notion with AI. So here I can basically have the content copied to my clipboard, visit back the Visual Studio Code and add the Notion with AI here. Again, go back to Figma dev mode. So I'm going to copy the content for the H1 and then go ahead in Visual Studio Code, type in H1, Command and V and paste the content. So if I go ahead in the browser and check this, right now we see we exactly are replicating the design in Figma. However, the typography style is missing. So what we can do is go back to Figma, and then here on the H1, we see that we have some typography style. So we would copy that to our clipboard. And then again, we visit the Visual Studio Code. And then here we have again the section which has the hero class, and then inside we have H1. So what we can do is go to the hero and then basically select H1, which means make sure we have hero, and then go one level deep, which is the H1, and then paste the Figma CSS here. Again, we need to do some cleanup. In this example, the font style, we don't need that. Font family, we don't need that. Text align, we do want it to keep it center. Line height, we do need it, but we don't need the comment. And I think we should be good to go. If we save this and check this in the browser, here you see we exactly replicated our design. In the browser, I can right click and inspect, and then here you see the inspect panel appears. So what I can do is basically drag the inspect panel to kind of see the responsive behavior, and exactly it is working the same way I want. Step 14. So let's just go ahead and create the testimonial section. Here, if I click on the Figma dev mode, what you notice is the space between each of the testimonial images is set to auto. This happens because we have again the flex set to justify content space between. This property allows the elements to be pushed all the way to the end. Also, what we notice is this is center aligned, which means we have a testimonial, and if I click on the parent element, we have the section, and the parent element is basically the auto layout that wraps all the testimonials, and it is center aligning them in the middle. So let's just go ahead and select all the images on the testimonial, export them all as PNGs. So I have exported the images. So if I select them, it's on my other screen, I can simply drag them to my image, and then here in my image folder I have all of them added. So what I need to do is basically create the testimonial section. Here after hero section, I would create the testimonial section. Also, what we need to do is basically copy the testimonial and add a class, which is testimonials, and press tab in our keyboard, and then here you see the testimonial is created. I do want to convert this into a section, and inside the testimonial we would have our images added. So if I navigate back to the Figma dev mode, here we have the section, and then if I go ahead and copy the CSS on the right side, we notice that it is set to display flex and align center. So these are the two properties that we care about. So if I go back to Visual Studio Code, all I need to do is basically select the testimonials in the CSS, right underneath, paste the properties, and wrap them in the CSS class. So here I would just add another section, which is called testimonials, and then right underneath that I create a class called testimonials as well. Open the curly brace and cut all of these inside the testimonial, and I don't need align self stretch or gap or even flex basically column. I do want to center align all of them. And if I go back to Figma, here we see that we have created our section with the CSS. If I now click on the testimonial, we have again set display to flex. We have a width which is 621 pixels, to make sure that it is center aligned, and as well as justify content between. So here I'm going to copy all of these as well. Go back to the Visual Studio Code. Inside the testimonial, I would create another section. So basically nesting sections inside sections, or you can have it as a normal div if you want to. And then here I would just paste the CSS. And right now I have the width set to 621 pixels and I'm happy with this. So I would save the CSS changes and all I have to do is go back to the section. Since I created a div, if I go back to CSS, here we have testimonial section and the div. So inside here we would create a div and inside that we would have our images. So img, which is stand for images, and now all the images have a source. So here I would just write // go to the images and then select all the images one by one, which is one password. And then for the alt, which is the accessibility, I would just copy that one password and then just write logo. I would hold command and duplicate this multiple times to basically update the image path again from one password to Amazon. Also update the alt to Amazon logo and repeat the same steps. So I'm going to fast forward and update all the images one by one. So I have updated the images one by one. And as you can see, the path is correct with the image name and the alt tag. And we are repeating the same structure, which is the section. And then inside of that, we have a div. And if I go back to the CSS, here we have the testimonial section, which is set to center align. And then inside that, we have the div images, which is set to 621 pixels, and we are center aligning all the images. So if I go ahead and visit the browser, here we are able to see the images. However, what you notice is there are two issues. Here we don't have the 48 pixels of margin bottom added to the section here. So we can fix this one first. If I go back to basically Visual Studio Code, instead of adding the 48 pixels of margin to every single section of our HTML, what I can do is remove that and go to the body all the way to the top, and then right here create again a CSS style and set that to display of flex, as well as flex direction, setting it to column, and then finally add a gap of 48 pixels. By doing that, each time we add a new section, we don't need to add 48 pixels of gap between our sections. So here we have our hero section, we have our testimonial section. So what I'm going to do is basically copy that and add the navigation section to the top. So here you notice that every time we add a section, we have to add a 48 pixels of gap. If we select the body, which is the parent, and set it to display flex and setting it to column direction and adding a 48 pixels of gap, this way, if we add a new section, we no longer need to keep adding 48 pixels. It automatically adds that for us. So if I go ahead and visit the browser, here you see that we have the spacing added already for us. However, what you notice is if I click on the testimonial on the browser, and let's just go ahead and zoom in a little bit more so we see the Chrome Inspect panel a little bit larger, the testimonial is working and we are setting the display flex. However, it's not actually being spanned all the way across. If I go ahead and visit the Figma file, and if I try to zoom out, you see that it is actually spanning all the way to the end of the screen and is being center aligned nicely. In order for us to fix that, all we have to do is basically go to the testimonial section and add a width of 100% by going all the way down and visiting the testimonial. And then here we have to make sure to add a width of 100%. This way we are telling the browser to make sure to span the testimonial all the way across. On top of the 100% width, we have to also change the align items into justify content, or you can keep this and simply duplicate that and add another property, which is called justify content. This way we are making sure that our element is center aligned both on the main and the cross axes. So now if I go ahead and visit the browser, now we see the testimonial is spanning all the way across and we're adding basically align item center and justify content center as well. However, what you notice is the quality of the images is a bit low. The reason is a bit low is because we went to Figma and we actually copied and exported the images, which is low resolution, and they're scaled down. So what we can do is we can go ahead and visit the Figma design mode and go ahead to the pages, and here we have the starter page. And in the starter page, we have all these images again with all high quality sizes. Here, if I click on any of them, they are basically larger in size. So what I'm going to do is basically select all the images that are larger in file and then scroll down, export the layers. And since I have all of these images added, what I can do is basically click and drag them from my other screen and then drop them in the images. And then again, Visual Studio Code tells me that you already have these images. Are you sure you want to replace them? And in this example, yes, I do want to replace them because they are higher in quality. So here I have to keep saying I do want to replace all of them. And once they're all replaced, now I can visit the browser. And what you notice is the image quality is better. However, the issue is the sizing is a bit off. So now I can go back to Figma and go and visit our website and switch back to the Figma dev mode. And then here I can scroll down. Let me collapse the pages and all of these and select the image. Here you see we have the images, which is set to rem. So let's just go ahead and switch it to pixel. What I do notice is the width is a bit variable. However, the height is set to 18 pixels, which means now if I click on the Toyota, the height is again 18 pixels. The width again is variable. So if you want to fix that, you don't need to keep on adding the height to every single one of the images. What you can do is basically set the width auto to all of them and making sure the height is set to 18. So if I go ahead and visit Visual Studio Code, under testimonial, we have our image, which is nested inside the div tag. And now inside of the div tag, we select all the images and we make sure the width is set to auto, which means automatically calculate the width of the image. However, the height of the image, we would set it to 18 pixels fixed. And now if I go ahead and save this and visit the browser, here you notice that the images are higher in quality, except one of them, which is a little bit pixelated, which is fine. You can always find a higher quality image in terms of the resolution and replace this one. But for now, I'm just going to keep it as is. But we managed to fix the issue, which means we exported the images with a higher quality in size and we replaced the lower quality images. Moreover, we added the width, which was again width of auto, and we scaled the height back to 18 pixels. So this way, all of them are now 18 pixels in height, and the width, which is auto, is automatically calculated. What you notice is the order may be wrong. So if I go ahead and visit Figma, we have again Snowflake, Toyota, 1Password, and then it follows by Amazon, Uber, and Figma. In order for us to reorder it, it's basically simple. In HTML, all you have to do is basically visit your images and move the HTML tags around. So here we have Snowflake. So what I would do is hold Option on my keyboard and then just move it to the top. And then we have Toyota next. So I would just again move Toyota up. And then we have 1Password, Amazon, and then Uber, move it to the top, and then finally Figma. And by reordering them, I'm going to save this, visit the browser, and then here you see that our images are being reordered properly. And this is how you export images from Figma, resize them proportionately, and add it to your HTML CSS. Step 15. Let's go ahead and target the toggle button. Here we see on the Figma side, if we click on the toggle, it is set to true, and we have two states, which is active and inactive. So if we take a look at the toggle on the left side, we have the active property set to false. This means on the CSS and HTML side, we need to create two classes, which toggles between active and inactive. Also, if I go ahead and click on the main component, here I'm navigated to the toggle component, and as you can see, I'm able to see the specs. Also, what I do notice is if I take a look at the right hand side, here we have exactly the similar styles, which is 4 pixels of padding to the top and bottom and 12 to left and right. And if I click on the chip component, here I notice it's exactly identical. So what I can do on the HTML and CSS side is to group them and only change the value of the text for the inactive one. However, if I double click on the active one, the font weight is 600. Also, there are other differences. For example, if I click on the background color, it is set to white. The other one doesn't have a background color. So I have to also pay attention to updating these two values on the HTML and CSS side. So since these are similar, let's go ahead and reuse the styles and only copy the changes that are relevant. In this example, I only need to copy the background color here. And if I go to visit my CSS, I would first search for chip to see the chip style. If I also scroll down, here I'm able to see the chip, and all these properties are relevant, which means I need to keep them if I do decide to use the toggle component. So what I can do, instead of actually creating everything from scratch, all I have to do is add a comma and then add dot toggle. However, what I noticed is 600 font weight, and the inactive one doesn't have the font weight of 600. So we can go ahead and fix that. Basically, since these are together, I can just add another comment, just write chip and toggle. So we are modifying the CSS values here. So if I scroll down here, all I have to do is basically add toggle and dash active. This way I'm creating the active toggle, and I have to copy paste the background color that I had on the Figma dev side. So if I go ahead and visit the Figma, I need to double click on the text and make sure to copy the color of the text. Everything else is still the same. So let's just go ahead, visit toggle active, and paste the color of the text. And the toggle inactive, all I have to do is basically copy that and then just write toggle and then just add inactive. And if I go ahead and visit Figma, for the inactive one here, you see we don't have any background color, so we can leave it as is. And if I go ahead and click on the text, I'm actually selecting this color. So what I would do is copy that and replace the color with the correct one, which is primary 75. And also I would remove the background color. The other thing I need to add is basically the font weight. So here the font weight, which is 600, I need to copy it and add it to the toggle inactive and reduce it to 400. Also in CSS, everything is rendered from top to bottom. Even though we have this 600, it will be overwritten by this value, which is toggle inactive 400. However, you don't want to have to deal with CSS overrides. So the better practice is to group these ones and add 600 to them, which means all I have to do is basically copy the chip blue and add a comma, and then also copy the chip purple as well. So chip purple and blue, and add another comma and copy the toggle active. And then once I copy all of these, I now need to add font weight of 600. So here I would just simply move it down and save it. So this way I'm not overriding the font weight, and font weight of 400 is only applied to toggle inactive, and the font weight of 600 is only applied to these chips, which is purple, blue, and toggle active. And if I go ahead and visit the browser, we see everything is still the same. So what I can do is I can do a test on now with Notion AI since I created these. So if I go ahead and visit Visual Studio Code, here we have the hero section, so I can expand that, and then here we have Notion with AI. So we can duplicate that 2 times, and here instead of chip, I add toggle, and then here I would just add toggle dash active, and then I would copy that and replace the other one, and then just add toggle inactive. So if I go ahead and save this and visit the browser, I now able to see that I have Notion with AI with a background color and another now Notion with AI with the correct colors. The only difference is now I need to basically go ahead, visit the website, and then what I do notice is both of them are placed next to one another and we have a background color, which is the toggle. The reason we don't see this again on the browser is because we don't have a background color added to our now Notion with AI for active and inactive toggle. So basically all I have to do is making sure I have another section, and if I try to zoom out here, I notice that this section is identical to the one to the top, which is center aligned, and right now we are nesting another toggle. So let's just go ahead in Visual Studio Code, copy this. Again, here we have testimonial section. So what we can do is add the pricing toggle section, and in the pricing toggle section we would just cut these 2 that we just created and replace the divs here in the image. And then what we can do is just write toggle dash pricing for our section name, and if I save this, here you notice that again the now with Notion AI is added in another section which is next to one another. However, they are not center aligned, so we can exactly repeat the same process for testimonial. Here we search for testimonial, so we can group the testimonial. However, if we group them, they would actually apply these values for the toggle pricing. So what we have to do is basically add the toggle pricing curly brace and cut these values, which is flex, center, and all of that, paste them. And then here what we can do is basically add that here in the comment section, group the testimonial and toggle pricing because we are center aligning everything. However, for the testimonial we have different styles. And now if we go ahead and visit, we see in the browser we have exactly center aligned our toggles. All we have to do is basically update the values, which is pay by month. So what I can do is go ahead and copy that. Here I have pay monthly, and go to the HTML, paste that, and go back to Figma, double click on the text, scroll to the content section, copy that, again visit HTML, paste that, and save this. So now if I go ahead and visit the browser, we have the correct text. However, the classes are wrong, so I have to swap the classes in HTML. So let's just go ahead and do that. The pay monthly is inactive and pay yearly by 20% is active one. And now if I go back and visit, it is correct. However, what I do notice is save 20% is blue. So if I go ahead and visit Figma, all I have to do is basically click that, and here on the right side I see save 20% is marked as blue, and go ahead inside HTML and add a span inside the div, 20% inside the span, and then we can go ahead and delete the rest. And what we have to do in CSS is target the toggle pricing and target the toggle active, and then go ahead and make the span blue, which means on the CSS, which is toggle pricing, and if I scroll down here, we open another curly brace. What you can do is you can nest the elements like that to basically target the nested elements in the HTML. Here we have toggle pricing and we have toggle active, and then we have the span. So what you can do is basically give the span a class and then just rename it to, for example, blue highlight, and then you can reuse this class in the CSS. So here you have toggle pricing, and then you add another class which is blue dash highlight, and now I can go ahead and paste this. Here I'm targeting the toggle pricing, and what you notice is I added a space. That means go ahead and select the blue highlight. You can also repeat the same process, meaning you can have your toggle pricing added at the top and then have your blue highlight nested like that. However, for these simple ones, if you don't want to nest curly braces inside one another, you can actually add a space, and this would exactly behave the same way. So if I go ahead and save this and visit the browser, I'm now able to see pay yearly with save 20% highlighted as blue. So all I have to do is basically fix the spacing here inside the span. And if I go ahead and visit the Visual Studio Code, even though the spacing is added here, it is not working on the browser because the browser is ignoring the extra white space. So what you can do in order to fix this issue, you can go ahead here and add something called entity code. In HTML, if you add an entity code, it always starts with an ampersand. So here, before that, we start with an ampersand, and then we add the white space entity code. So it's actually called non-break space. So NB, which is non-break. And here you see Visual Studio Code is even giving us the suggestion. The entity code that we are going to use is this one, ampersand non-break space, which is NBSP, and then we close that with the semicolon. So if I go ahead and select that and save this, because we're adding this, the browser is going to add a space between our pay yearly and save 20%. And then finally, I need to add the background color. So what I need to do is go ahead, visit Figma, and then here we have the toggle. And if I go ahead and visit this, what we can do is first change the rem to pixel. So let's just go ahead and switch it to pixel. And then we see the values here, which is 8 pixels of padding with the radius and background color. So here, all I have to do is basically copy the radius and background color. And again, if I go ahead and take a look at the left-hand side here, we have the section. And then we have the toggle, and inside the toggle, we have 2 toggles, which means we have to create another HTML element and, for example, rename it to toggle wrapper. And then once we do that, then we can add the 500 pixels of radius and a background color with 8 pixels of padding. So here, what I would do is go ahead in the toggle pricing, create another HTML element, call this toggle dash wrapper, and then add a tab, and then move the pay monthly as well as pay yearly to the top. Save this. If I go ahead and visit this, you see it is working as expected. However, the background color is not showing. So all I have to do is go ahead and add the background color, which is toggle dash wrapper is the class that we selected. Command and V to add the background color and a border radius. And if I go ahead and visit the browser, perfect, we are seeing the background color. However, the white active toggle is basically covering it. So all we have to do is add the padding of 8 pixels that we saw in Figma. So add the padding of 8 pixels, save this, and take a look at this in the browser one more time. So here we successfully managed to add the toggles. And as you can see here, we transferred the active and inactive toggles inside our HTML and CSS website. Step 16. So we're going to tackle the card, which is the last part of our Notion website. Here, if I click the card, on the right hand side, we see the properties, which is the text properties. The text properties are not really useful for us because what we care about is basically the color and the padding of our card. They are identical and they are getting repeated every single time. The only difference is for the get started, we are using another link. We already created the link component. So what we can do is basically click on the main component and take a look at the card, and as you can see, it's only one single component, which means that we don't need to create multiple different variations. So what we have to do first is click on the card, and as you can see, it is rounded with 24 pixels of padding across. So if I scroll down here, I have the CSS properties generated for me, also with the correct colors and the border radius. So what I need to do is basically copy this, visit Visual Studio Code, and here what we need to do is basically create a card. We can basically give it a class of card and then press tab, and for now we would just place some lorem content by pressing tab, And then we need to visit CSS. Also on the CSS side, we would just add a comment and add our card here. Here we would select the card and open the curly braces and Command and V to paste the style. So if we go ahead and save this, we no longer need the width, but for now we would just keep it just to see it on the browser side. And here right now we see it on the browser. If I go ahead and take a look at this, our card is created, but it doesn't have any background color. So what we can do is basically visit Figma and now copy the background color and the border radius. By doing that, I would basically also add these here and save this. And I would go ahead and visit the browser. And as you can see, the card is correct and the styling is linked properly. Also, what I did was imported the images. So if I click on my images here, I have all these business, enterprise, free and plus images exported. So I already went ahead in Figma and exported these and already imported them in Visual Studio Code. So inside our card, the other step that we need to now tackle is the top. And then here, if I click on the top auto layout, what I do notice is here we have, again, inside the master parent card, we have a layer called top. And the layer top also, if I open it, it has the icon, which is the image, and 2 text layers. So let's just go ahead and do that. Let's click on the top. And let's just go ahead and copy the CSS styles. And inside the HTML, what I would do is basically select the card and then open a new line and then just write card-top, which is basically the top layer of the card. And then here, once I have this, I would go to CSS and now select basically card-top inside the card top and then paste the CSS styles here. What you can do is if you don't want to nest your elements like that, we can simply cut that and then just place it outside because this is already its class by its own. Also, we don't need the align self stretch because this is a default value. And if you go ahead and save this, nothing is going to happen because we haven't added anything to the card top. So the first thing that we need to add is the image. So here we'll just add img and the /, go to the img folder and add the free plan. So here we just write free plan, save this. Also, to make it easier, we can copy the comment and add the card section here, card pricing. Also, there is another HTML element, so you can turn this div to article. If you want to make it look different or main, it really doesn't matter. It's not going to have any effect. So right now, once we save this, we can go ahead and visit the browser, and now we see the image, which is added to the card. If I go ahead and visit Figma, what I do notice is the image here is set in a different size. So if I click on any of them, and if I try to scroll down here, I see that all of them, the height is set to 40 pixels. So if I try to basically switch between different images, the height is set to 40 pixels. So what I can do is basically have the same approach that I had for the other images. Go to the card top, select the image, and have the width set to auto, and then have the height set to 40 pixels. So if I go ahead and save this, and visit the browser, now I see my image size is correct. Now I need to go ahead and visit Figma again and select the text value. Here we have our paragraph text, which is basically having the typography style generated on the right side. We only need the color and the weight because by default the font size is 14 pixels. So if I go ahead and copy this and visit CSS, if I search for the body, here we see that we have the font family added. And what I do notice is we don't have the font size added in the body. So that means we also need to add the font size. If I scroll down all the way to the card top section, here we are going to add a paragraph, which is a p tag. And inside that paragraph, I'm going to Command and V to paste the styles. However, I don't need the inner because this one is already added to the body in HTML, as well as the font style and line height. I'm going to basically cut these and remove that from my HTML. And the other thing I need to do is basically go ahead on the HTML side, right underneath this, add a paragraph tag, and then just write free, which is the name of the plan. Now if I go ahead and visit the browser, I exactly see the image with the name of the plan, which is free. And if I go ahead and visit Figma, the other text element that I need to add is the price. So what you can see is that we have, again, similar styles in terms of color and font weight. The only difference is the font size, which is 32 pixels. So what I would do is copy this, go back and visit the HTML, and then here we have the paragraph, which is set to free. What we can do is give it a class, basically call this card plan, and duplicate this, and for the second one, call this card price. This way, if I go ahead and save this and visit the CSS styles, so what I can do is now target them here, which is card plan, and then open the curly brace and then move the font size of 14 pixels down, and then create another one, which is card price, and then basically paste the font size of 32 pixels. Also, these are CSS classes on their own, so what I can do is basically cut them outside. It's not going to have any effect because these are unique CSS classes. However, these are HTML elements that doesn't have any classes, so I do want to nest them inside the card top. And what you notice is I'm already grouping the paragraphs by selecting P, which means both of them are paragraphs. So the color and the font weight of 700 is going to be added to both of them. However, because the plan and price is different, we are uniquely setting the size of 14 pixels and 32 pixels using the CSS class. And then finally, I would just go ahead and update the values. So here I would go and visit the website and go select the actual card. We have $0 and then we have our sign up. So what I can do is basically copy the $0 and just go ahead and add it to our index.html just to go ahead and see how it looks. So far we managed to create the top header of the card inside our free card. And if I go ahead and visit the Figma dev mode, if I collapse all the layers, if I also scroll down, here we managed to create the top, so we're done with the top. And now if I click on the link, we already have the component created. So what I need to do is basically go ahead and visit the navigation section and open it. Here I do have a link, so I'm just going to simply copy it and go ahead and paste that right underneath the card top. So here I'm going to paste the link, change the value to sign up, and change the class to white because it's no longer off-white. So once I save this and go ahead and visit the browser, I managed to add the link properly. What you notice is the link is not 100% across. So what I can do is basically target the card, which is the parent card, and select the anchor, which is the link. So this way I'm going to make the width 100%. So here if I scroll up to the card, I have the link. So here I would just select the link inside the card. If I select the link outside, that means it's going to select all the links. If I go ahead and visit the browser, it's going to select all the links at the top, and I don't want to target those, and I only want to target basically the links inside the card. So that's why I'm nesting the .link class inside the card, and I only need to give it a width of 100%. And if I go ahead and save this and visit the browser, I now managed to create the sign up link. And then finally, I need to add the bullets. So if I go ahead and select the bullets, I exactly see them having the similar styles. The only difference is the font weight of 400 and the line height of 22 pixels. So what I would do is I would copy this and go ahead and visit the HTML in the VS Code, and right underneath the sign up, in order for me to create a bullet, I just need to add an unordered list with li, which is an ordered list. And let's just add a lorem1 for now. And let's just go ahead and duplicate that multiple times. If we go ahead and see it, we now see the bullets added. Now the only difference is we need to target the bullets and have them the same CSS styles as the card plan. So what I can do is basically select all of them and add a class of card-bullet and save this. And by doing that, I now can go to the CSS styles and scroll down. Here underneath the card plan and card price, I would just write card bullet and open the curly brace, paste it. Here I have font weight of 400 with a line height of 22 pixels. However, what I do notice is the other texts have a font weight of 700, so I can't really group the bullet with it. However, what I can do is copy the color and add it to the bullet here. So we're happy with this. Now if I go ahead and visit the browser, we might not see the difference that much, but we have successfully created this using the identical stylings that we had on the Figma side. So what I would do is remove the dummy text and duplicate this 4 times. So let's just go ahead on the index.html, remove the lorem, and then collapse the cards. So here, before I collapse this, if I want to break it down, we have our card, which has the card top, as well as an unordered list with the bullets and the link in the middle. And what I need to do is basically cut this entire card, repeat it 4 times, and wrap it inside a grid. So if I go ahead and take a look at the Figma and try to zoom out, here you see that we have the 4 cards. And if I click on any of them, we have the section. And then if I take a look at the right side, the section has the CSS styling. For now, I'm going to copy this. However, we are going to make some modification and use modern CSS grid to achieve the responsive behavior. However, for now, I'm going to copy this right here, add another section and call this card-grid, add a tab and make sure I have it consistent as section, which is consistent to the HTML tags up top. And then go ahead under the CSS all the way to the top right here, add card-grid, and then let's just go ahead and paste the CSS styles there. And then finally, I would go to the HTML, cut the card, which is a single card, And inside the section, which is the card grid, I'm going to copy paste it 4 times. So here I would add a comment, and then I would just add number 1, which is this is the first card, or you can basically call this free plan, and then basically paste this. And then here we can collapse this and add our plus plan, and right underneath that we would paste that one. For now we would just change the name to plus. We would update the values later on and then repeat that 2 times. And then here we added the business plan, and then finally the enterprise plan, and then we would just update the enterprise title. So if I try to break this down, we have the card grid, which is the section, and inside that we have 4 articles, and each article, if I try to open it, has a top section, and the top section has 1 image and 2 paragraphs, which is the name of the plan and the price. And if I try to collapse that, I have the link, which is sign up, and it's going to change between different plans, and then finally an unordered list with bullets, and this gets repeated 4 times for the 4 plans inside the card grid. And then we finally copied the CSS styling of the card grid from our Figma all the way to the CSS. And now if we go ahead and visit it, right now we see exactly our cards being displayed correctly. However, the sizing is off, and if I try to also resize this, they would actually collapse and move to the next line. However, they are not that responsive. Also, we only managed to update the title, so I'm going to fast forward and update the images and also update the bullets. And if I do want to update, for example, the plus, if I go ahead and visit the plus plan, all I have to do is basically update the path to plus and then update the price to $10, and then here just change the alt tag to plus. Also, the plus plan has the get started, so here I would just change this to get started, and the link is black, so we are using a black one. And now if I go ahead and visit it, here you see the plus image is different than the free. We updated the price and we switched the link to black. So I'll repeat the same process, fast forward and update the other values. So I fast forwarded and I have updated the content. If I go ahead and visit Figma, just to do a quick recap, we went ahead and selected the card and we visited the main component. We added our card, which was consist of the top, the link, and the actual bullets. And if I go ahead and click on the instance, here each of the cards have different images with different plans. However, they have the similar look and feel. And in terms of the content, if I go ahead and visit the Visual Studio Code, if I open my card grid, and if I open one of them, for example, the free plan, here you see the article has the div called card top. And if I go ahead and visit the Figma, here you see we have our section, which is the grid, and we have the card, which is consists of top, link, and the bullet on the left hand side. And then if I go ahead and visit Visual Studio Code, we have our card, which is consists of card top. Inside the card top, we have the image, and this is how we update the path of the image. We have our plan and our pricing, which is nested inside the top card alongside the image. And if I collapse this, it is followed by the link. And after that, if I open the UL, which is the bullets, each LI is containing 1 single bullet. So we have repeated this multiple times. And if I go ahead and visit Figma, this is how we are translating the Figma bullets into HTML bullets using UL and LI, which stands for unordered list and list. And then finally, if I go ahead and visit this in the browser, here you notice that we have exactly everything that we needed. The images are updated, the plans are updated alongside the bullets, the actual cards are center aligned. However, in terms of the sizing, the height of them are not correct, and also the width of them is not correct as well. However, if I try to make this smaller, they are responsive, which is good. The only downside is they are very small. So we have to give them a minimum value. So if I go ahead and visit Figma Div Mode, if I click on this, and if I try to scroll down, here we are giving it a minimum value of 290 pixels to each individual cards. So what I can do on the CSS side is to add a grid instead of actually adding a flex box. So what we need to do is basically change the display from flex to grid, and also now add grid template columns. And in grid template columns, instead of actually manually adding 290 pixels and then repeating that multiple times, here if I try to repeat that 4 times, 290 pixels, what I can do is also basically try to comment that so they don't have an effect. Now if I go ahead and visit this, now we managed to see our CSS cards having 290 pixels. However, the actual cards inside our browser is not going all the way across. And if you remember, if I try to go back to CSS, we manually set the width and we said that we no longer need that. So what we can do is basically also remove align flex start, which is a default value, as well as the width 171 pixels. And if I go ahead and save that and now go ahead and visit the browser, now we see exactly our cards having the correct size and the bullets and everything are being displayed correctly. However, if I try to make them smaller, now we are running into an issue of not being responsive. So what I can do is use a trick using CSS Grid and actually align them and make them responsive. So if I go ahead and visit the CSS, here we no longer need any of these. So what I would do is basically uncomment that and only keep the gap, because the gap, we need the gap between our cards. And now let's just go ahead and remove all of these for now. And now if I go ahead and visit it, we see the gap is now fixed. However, they are not center aligned. So we need to add one more property that we just deleted, which is called justify content. And we have this as center. So if I go ahead and visit that, now we managed to center align them. Everything is perfect. The only issue is the responsive behavior. Because on the CSS side, we have added all of them as 290 pixels and we repeated this 4 times because we have 4 cards. We can use something called the repeat function. So what I would do is basically cut that. We no longer need this and we add this as a value. So here, because we are using CSS Grid, we can just use a repeat function, and repeat function accepts 2 arguments. So here we add a comma. This is the first argument and this is the second argument. So in the first argument, we can add a value called autofit. So here we would just go ahead and write autofit. And for the second argument, we have another function we can nest inside that, which is called min max. So here we have the min max. And as you can see, if we repeat this pattern inside the repeat function, we will be able to create automatic responsive grid. And again, min max also accepts 2 arguments. So here I would need to add a comma. Again, the first argument as well as the second argument. So the first argument that we need to add is basically the minimum. Here we have to add the minimum value, which is 290 pixels. And the second argument in CSS Grid, what we can do is add a fractional value, which stands for FR, and we have to give it a unit. Here we would just give it 1 FR, which means take all the available space and make sure your minimum width is set to 290 pixels. Because on the Figma side, if I try to go to the design mode and try to zoom out, here you see on the Figma side, if I try to resize this, you see the cards are being resized, which is good. If I try to basically Command Z that, we want basically have the same behavior repeated here. So to break this down, we use the repeat function as the parent, which accepts 2 arguments. First one, which is the autofit, which tells the browser automatically fit the CSS cards. We added a comma and we add another function inside our repeat function, and the function is min max, which means add a minimum and maximum value. The minimum value, we are giving it a 290 pixel. The reason we're giving this 290 pixel, if we try to visit Figma and go to the dev mode, and here if we click on one of the cards, and if we try to scroll down, here we have the minimum value of 290 pixels. And now the other value, which is the maximum value, we tell that to grow using FR, and then we tell it to grow 1 time, not 2 times. Here you can add like 2 times or 1 time, but the default is making sure you add 1, which means grow 1 time. Now if I go ahead and save this and try to visit the browser, here you see we have the gap, which is correct. And now if I try to resize this, our card is being resized for us. And if I try to make it smaller, we are into 4 line. And then if I try to make it smaller, we are basically back to 1 line. So here from 1 column, we went to 2 column, to 3 column, and then to 4 columns. And then finally, what you notice is the gap on the right and left side is set to 0. So we have to basically add the property that we just deleted, which is padding of 96. If I click on my section here, if I scroll up, we had the padding before, so which is 0 and 96 pixels on the right and left. So we would copy that on our clipboard and go ahead and visit the grid card and add it right below the gap value, which is 24 pixels. Save this, and now let's just go ahead and visit the browser. Here we see that exactly we have the 96 pixels of spacing on the right and left side. All the cards have the same height, and if we try to make them smaller, they are wrapping to the next line. All of this is done using one CSS line, which is CSS Grid. So if I go ahead and try to visit the CSS, we are using this, and this is a very powerful pattern to follow to create responsive grid. Figma at the moment doesn't have this feature. So if I go ahead and visit Figma, and if I click on my section, Figma tries to produce Flexbox with the wrap, which is an older technology. So if you try to decide to exactly have the same responsive behavior, you can use the CSS Grid to achieve that. And then finally, one minor touch, if I take a look at the bullets, they are basically all the way pushed to the left side, which means if I go ahead and visit the Figma, here you see that the bullets are pushed 24 pixels from the left side. They are aligned with the actual content. So what we need to do is basically go ahead inside the card, and here we had the link. So what we have to do is basically select the unordered list and add a padding left to it. And then here we can basically just give it 16 pixels for now. And let's just go ahead and visit the browser. Here we have added 16 pixels of padding left. and our bullets are exactly aligned, and we managed to create responsive grid from Figma to CSS and HTML. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more design tips and tutorials, and let me know what you think in the comments down below.